This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
Good morning, it's 3 minutes after 10. Thank you for choosing LBC this morning. I'm James O'Brien. Did you like that? I thought I'd mix it up a bit, do a slightly different introduction to the one I've been doing almost every day for God knows how long. I don't think it worked personally. Didn't sound as authentic, did it? It'd be a bit like sort of, I don't know, walking into a burger bar and not seeing your favourite burger on the menu. And oddly, when I find myself thinking about rail nationalisation and rail privatisation, I find myself thinking of burger bars. I don't know how indicative this will be of your age, but I looked up this morning the year in which Casey Jones burger bars disappeared from British Railways, British railway stations. And the reason I did that was because I work with younger colleagues. My colleagues are generally younger than me, and none of them have any memory at all of what the railways were like when they were publicly owned. And one of the great memories I have of the publicly owned period of British Rail was Casey Jones burger bars. I think it was Sir Peter Parker, if memory serves. Peter Parker ran the railways for a while and came up with this wizard wheeze of introducing US-style burger bars to British railway stations in order to raise revenue that could then be pumped back into the railway system. What year do you think they all disappeared? If you're anything close to my kind of vintage, this will work. Don't worry, I'm not going to dedicate much more time to a non-existent burger chain. But what year do you think they disappeared? I thought that was quite interesting, quite a good mark of why my colleagues in their 20s have no idea what I'm talking about, which happens increasingly often, actually, worryingly often, you might say. 1994. So, I mean, that's 30 years ago. That's maths, that is. And if you, of course, you'd need to be conscious. So, you'd have to be 38, 40 to have any memory at all of Casey Jones burger bars. And therefore, I would posit any memory at all of nationalised railways? Because I think that the timing is pretty similar. It goes back further, doesn't it? The privatisation of railways. But I can just about remember what they were like. I can remember Terry Wogan, the broadcasting titan, Sir Terry Wogan. He was always making jokes about the BBC canteen and I think British rail sandwiches. It became a byword for public sector profligacy. The railways were a byword when I was young for why you should never let government run anything, why nationalised industries, along with British Leyland. Listen, I could be misremembering, but it's why British Leyland and British Rail became bywords for decline, even perhaps declinism. And I mention it today because the Labour proposal's getting some headlines this morning, despite the fact that really it's essentially a continuation of what was already underway with a little bit more heft. I like the word renationalise, and I like the time scale they've put in place. They will rationalise most passenger rail services within 5 years. So as the contracts expire, so they will bring passenger services back into public control. And then if you travel by railway, you'll be pleased to hear about automatic refunds for train delays and improved internet connections. That seems to me to be a really silly missed opportunity for anyone who's been in power for, say, 14 years, because internet connections on a train are a game changer. I don't really want to look at the plans. They're still frightened of using the word nationalisation. That was a good one from Gar. He reminds British Rail coffee is going up by 2p a slice. That's quite... I've got to stop doing these. You send me jokes at the beginning of the show and I get all distracted by them. It's very amateurish and childlike of me. So stop it. Stop sending me funny things at the very top of the programme and let me at least set up the grown-up phone in before we start messing around in the shallow end. I want to look more at what's gone so wrong, because there's a weird pendulum here, isn't there? You know, we use the pendulum paradigm when we're talking about change, whether it's political or social change. The idea that you have about a year where things are quite well balanced. So they go from being far too far in one direction, and then the pendulum starts swinging back, And then you have this weird period of time where things are okay, and then the pendulum starts swinging that way again. So nationalisation obviously saw the pendulum of British Railways go too far in that direction. They became sclerotic. They became hidebound by, I think industrial action was probably quite a big part of it. But also, I always think of Carry On at Your Convenience, the Carry On film. I acknowledge that my cultural references so far on the programme have been a little bit dated, all right? I don't think that the Carry On films are confined to people who were around when they were made. The younger generation surely have enjoyed a little bit of Kenneth Williams or Barbara Windsor in their time. But Carry On at Your Convenience was a pastiche, really, of industrial relations, in which I think Sid James played the shop steward. And they would go out on strike at the drop of a hat. And it was funny at the time because it was redolent of reality. It reminded people of reality. So at one point, I think the people in the toilet factory who were in charge of polishing flushes were asked to also polish toilet seats. I've made that up, but the point stands. And therefore, they all went out on strike because you couldn't ask the flush polishers to also buff a toilet seat. If you did that, then everyone would go out on strike until the union had renegotiated terms and conditions. Now, I am a big fan of trade unions. I think, again, pendulum comes into play. Trade unions have too much power. They can bring a country to a standstill in pursuit, I would argue, in Arthur Scargill's case, of quite a vain political project. And then when they don't have enough power, you end up with Rupert Murdoch and Wapping and people being sacked left, right and centre without really having any recourse to justice. So the pendulum of the railways, I don't know when it hit the sweet spot. I don't know when the railways were good, but I do remember growing up. So now you'd be going back 30 years or so when I used them all the time. Never ever really setting off on a railway journey, contemplating the possibility of it not going swimmingly. You'd leave your home, you'd get to Kidderminster station, you'd get into Euston pretty much exactly when you expected to get into Euston. These are the days before mobile phones. So if you were delayed or if someone was meeting you or something like that, it was very difficult to get hold of them to tell them that you weren't going to be there, which means it never happened. Because if it did, you'd remember the stress of how the heck am I going to tell my mum that I've missed my child? Because it was stressful and you couldn't make phone calls. Could you make phone calls from trains? I don't think you could make phone calls from trains. You'd need a very long wire, wouldn't you, to make sorry. So why have they got so bad? 0345 6060 973. What has happened to our railways? The appalling state of the system is, I think, inarguable. The idea that you set off on a railway journey confident that it will go according to the timetable, that withered on the vine some time ago. I'm interested in, that was it was B-days. They wanted to start making B-days, which in many ways is going to be the same sort of China work as a toilet, isn't it? But the union were outraged at the prospect of making B-days. And British Rail was a byword for that kind of union excess. And that's why the privatisation project was both popular and enacted. British Rail had been essentially brought to its knees by various factors, of which I think trade union excess was probably one. But the Kenneth Cope was the shop steward. I've got to stop doing this because then you just send me texts correcting my memories of 1970s comedy films. Kenneth Cope was the shop steward and Sid James was the foreman. You're quite right, of course, but that's not really important in the context of a conversation that we're hoping to have about the railways. What has happened to them? Is it lazy to suggest that this is, with the possible exception of the water companies, this is the best available example of what happens when the Tories get their hands on the national infrastructure? When the Tories get to sell what really belongs to all of us to their mates. And I grant you, the money that comes into the public purse, so it is, at least in theory, spent on all of us. But you look at what's happened to the water companies, the amount of money that has been taken out of those companies, while it is dwarfed only by the amount of sewage that has been pumped into our waterways. There's another story in the news today about how reluctant we all are to go swimming in the sea. Think about how sad that is. Only 14% of people are likely to swim in Britain's seas and rivers this summer because of raw sewage. Raw sewage. So there's a wonderful example of what happens when the Tories flog off stuff that belongs to all of us and instead turn it into cash cows to be milked by their plutocrat mates, or indeed sometimes by foreign government-owned utility companies. Is the railway the nearest comparison to that, the second best example? Because when I say simplistic or undergraduate, I'd quite like it to be more complicated, because otherwise it makes us look like patsies, doesn't it? It makes us look like a nation of lemmings. What's that you say? You're selling off our railways, and then someone over there, probably Tony Benn, says, oh no, you don't want to do that. Give it 20 years and there'll be an absolute disaster, and the only people who've done well out of it will be the people who bought the shares, and they'll have disappeared over the horizon to count all their money, and the rest of us will be left trying to get from A to B by donkey. And then we go, oh, it's 20 years later and he was right. That's what I mean by simplistic. I'd like it to be a little bit more complicated than that. But I'm not sure it is. One of the oddest things that's happened to me as I've got older, you're supposed to become more right-wing as you get older, aren't you? And I am now in the kind of tax bracket where every Tory budget makes me better off. It's, on one level it's great, although I will continue to vote against them. The weirdest thing is that you kind of wonder whether things are actually as clear and as simple as you used to think they were when you were very young. Why are the railways in such a mess? Because there is a brand of conservative politics that looks at everything as a potential profit pipeline. And if we let them turn anything into a potential profit pipeline, they will suck the profits out of it until the pipeline itself is in jeopardy or broken. Is it that simple? Is that what's happened? These companies have just sucked all of the profits through these pipes. Costs about 50 quid more to get to New York and back now, if you shop around for the flights, than it does to go to Newcastle and back in first class on a British train. Just riddle me that. New York and back on an aeroplane versus Newcastle and back on a train. So what has happened? And feel free to tell me that it is as simple as you suggest. We are a country that's been gaslit and groomed by right-wing media owners and right-wing politicians into literally handing over our sovereignty, do you want to call it that? Handing over our national infrastructure, handing over our public utilities to the highest bidders, who then just suck the marrow out of the bones of our country until they're fat on it and there's nothing left for the rest of us to enjoy. I don't know. They know the price of everything and the value of nothing, suggests Peter, channeling Oscar Wilde this morning. And I guess you're right. Why do I want it to be more complicated than that? Because it's too depressing to think that we've been mugged in this fashion by all of the people who've made all of the money out of our railways while they have withered before our very eyes. So, question number one. What was nationalised railway like? You need to be a little bit older to answer that question, but I don't want everybody getting all rose-tinted and dewy-eyed this morning. What was the nationalised railway like? What does the prospect of renationalisation do to you as someone who remembers what they were like last time they were nationalised? And number two, why have they ended up in such an almighty mess? It feels like in the last 2 years, someone's pressed fast forward on the decline of our railways, doesn't it? It's only relatively recently. I tell you when I do my judging on this. I do my judging when I've got a book out, because I go on quite a lot of tours. I do quite a lot of book events, and I much prefer to travel by train, partly because I can't read in cars. I get motion sickness, and I love travelling on the train, historically. With the new book, which came out in November, it was a completely different experience from the first book, which came out 4 years ago. The second one came out during lockdown, so that doesn't really count. But with the first one, I'd get to the station, I'd buy myself a paperback, usually some crime fiction. I'd get a copy of Private Eye or something like that. I'd get into the train if it was at the weekend. I'd pay for an upgrade to Weekend First. If my ticket was being paid for by the book festival, they'd have already got me the fancy ticket. I go and get one of those nice seats where you can stretch out, spread all your stuff, put your headphones on the table, plug your phone in, and it would just be a lovely. That's 4 years ago. This time round, I'm more likely to be spending 2 hours standing at Paddington, staring at the board, wondering what the hell has happened to the train I was supposed to be on, because according to the actual departure schedule, it never existed at all. 0345 6060 973. Memories of the nationalised railways, but much, much, much more importantly, explanations of what has gone wrong. Hit the numbers now, you will get through. Shall we start Idiot's Corner early today? David Hack has been in touch. He says, we live, like it or not, in a capitalist country. If we don't like it, move to Cuba if they let you. Mate, they are literally renationalising the railways if they get into power. And that doesn't involve you or me emigrating to Cuba. It is essentially a socialist policy in a capitalist country. Because guess what? Politics is a little more complicated than your analysis allows. It's 10:18.
James O'Brien on LBC.
21 minutes after 10, and as is often the case on this programme, despite my pledges to do better and my efforts in that department, if you're listening in Scotland, it's a fairly weird exercise this morning because, of course, in Scotland, the ScotRail franchise was essentially taken away from the private sector in 2022 and put in the hands of essentially put in the hands of the Scottish government, an operator of last resort owned by the Scottish government, which was welcomed by all of the unions, ASLEF, RMT, TSSA. So I think that kicked off April of 2022. I wonder how many English journalists or London-based journalists covering this story today are even aware of what has happened in Scotland, what happened in Scotland almost 2 years ago to the day. A genuine question, guilty as charged, usually, and historically and in the past. But my goodness me, the idea that this is some terrifying communist conspiracy is rather undone by the fact that if you hop on a train from Edinburgh to North Berwick, you're already part of what the Labour Party is planning for the rest of the United Kingdom. 22 after 10 is the time. Appropriately enough, Andrew is in Cumbernauld in North Lanarkshire. Andrew, what would you like to say?
I would just like to say that I'm older than yourself, so I have very definite memories of the British Rail nationalised era, and sometimes it could be a bit rubbish.
Sometimes. I mean, it was almost famous for being rubbish, wasn't it? I presume that underfunding was part of the problem. If the Tories wanted to privatise it, they would want it to decline. But it was more than a bit rubbish, I think.
Yeah, but the thing was, what you've hit the nail on the head there. A lot of it was expecting a champagne service from a ginger beer budget, and you weren't going to get it. The management were pretty sharp and were experienced rail women. They'd been on the railways all their lives, all their working lives, yes, and they knew how to run it. When you fragment it and privatise it, you get various people, notably from bus companies, that will be parachuted in to try and pick up the reins of doing something that a career rail woman had done. And the problem was that in the run-up to privatisation, there was sectorisation, which meant that the British Rail, it was still British Rail, but it carved up its operations into individual units, which is where you got Network South East and Intercity West Coast and Gatwick Express and all the rest of it.
So making a company, a previously publicly owned company, as attractive as possible to private sector buyers is an entirely different proposition from structuring that company in a way that prioritises the needs of passengers. That underpins almost everything we're talking about, doesn't it?
Yes. I mean, do you remember, you might not, if you've got no particular handle on railways, you might not remember Chris Green, who was director of ScotRail at one point.
That's a bit surreal, that is, that you mentioned that.
Now, the thing was...
Don't you want to know why it's a bit surreal?
Go ahead.
Well, I got a mate called Chris Green, right? And yesterday we got a message on WhatsApp from, I think we put him in Idiot's Corner, from someone else called Chris Green. I can't remember what gibberish he was coming out with. But I've been exchanging comments with Chris Green, who's a journalist and writer from my neck of the woods in Worcestershire, about all the other people called Chris Green that he has been confused with over the years. There was a BNP organiser called Chris Green, and there was also a US gay porn star called Chris Green. There's a Tory MP called Chris Green. There's loads and loads of Chris Greens. And then I was literally, the last message that he sent me was at 9:47 this morning, just before I came on air. And the first caller of the day comes on air and tells me about another Chris Green.
Yeah, and the thing was, he did a pretty bang-up job at trying to run ScotRail, because you realised that...
Hang on a minute. You are a massive railway enthusiast, aren't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. You're not remotely interested in my Chris Green-based fascinations at all. I mean, you could. I mean, you're polite, and I respect you for it. You're not even vaguely diverted by this astonishing Chris Green coincidence that you have become part of, or you just want to crack on talking about your first love, the railways.
Yeah, absolutely.
You carry on, mate. Respect to you.
No, right, fair enough. Right, now we realised that running services locally, or having a local steer on running it, albeit under the nationalised umbrella, having local management running their particular fiefdom, albeit it did not require franchised operations to do that. It simply needed good railway people running it on a local basis.
So you are local people for local railways. You are optimistic about. Has it made a measurable difference to the railways in Scotland since April 2022?
I haven't a clue. I've not been on a train for years.
Where does your enthusiasm kick in then? Do you have model railways? Do you just like to visit?
No.
What is it then?
I always used to be, because I used to live in the Shetland Islands at one point, and there isn't a train to be had for about
where does
200
this?
miles.
I mean, you were put through as a railway enthusiast, Andrew, and you haven't been on a train for years, and you used to live 200 miles away from the nearest station.
Yeah.
I think you've been missold, mate. You're going to come up in an advert soon on LBC. Have you been missold, Andrew, in Cumbernauld? Yes, I bloody was missold, Andrew, in Cumbernauld. Frank's in Hyde in Manchester. Frank, what do you reckon?
Good morning, you man. How are you today?
I can't complain, Frank. Do you know anyone called Chris Green?
Yeah, I'll plead guilty. Obviously, I've got an enthusiasm for railways, but I was also a 30-year railway manager.
Okay.
To the point where I came out with an all stations first-class free pass, and I was part of the privatisation process.
Okay.
When John Major broke up the railways, he broke it into about 100 various parts. The doctrine of allowing the franchises to fall in and bringing the operation of trains, etc., under public control, Network Rail is already under public control, doesn't cure the ill. The big ill is that the trains are owned by the investment industry. They're owned by what are known as ROSCOs, rolling stock companies. Last year, those rolling stock companies paid dividends to their shareholders.
£409 million.
Spot on.
Oh, look at that.
Spot on.
Boom.
No government, Labour, Tory or whatever, has got the funds to buy out those rolling stock companies. So the trains will remain in private hands. What really sickens me to my back teeth is when I see perfectly good, usable, fast, comfortable trains on the end of a crane being sold to Mexico and Nigeria, which is what is happening as we speak.
Well, you're not watching a crane as we speak. You're suggesting they are being sold as we speak. But what you actually said was that what you hate is looking at trains on the end of a crane. Well, you're not doing that as we speak, I don't think.
I hate the concept of it.
I do as well. Well, look, listen, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. It's a huge factor in the conversation that we're having and in the proposals that Labour have put forward. There are no plans, categorically no plans, to nationalise rail freight. Hang on. Not everybody understands it as well as you do. There are no plans to nationalise rail freight companies or rolling stock companies. So on a scale of 1 to 10, what does the renationalisation of most passenger rail services, how much of a positive stroke improvement is it?
3 or 4.
That's all.
Yeah,
but it's better than nothing. Yeah. But it's a long way off.
Oh, good God! Yeah.
All right, I mean, it's a long way off. I've got to go to the news, Frank. Before you go, do you know anyone called Chris Green?
Chris Green was one of the best managers we ever had.
There you go. That's it. That's all I want. That's it. Amelia Cox has the headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 33 minutes after 10. It is Thursday, which means that happily Mystery Hour will be upon us at 12 o'clock. But before that, I've done something a bit weird this week. I don't know if you've noticed. We've successfully revisited and remembered one of the features that we normally forget on the programme. For example, when did we last remember to do Woke Watch? Admittedly, attempts to portray everything you don't like as woke have diminished somewhat in recent weeks, recent months, despite the best efforts of people like Liz Truss to blame their own idiocy on wokeness. But the woke thing hasn't quite landed in the way that it was landing this time last year when we probably came up with the idea. So you haven't heard the woke watch thing, sting, bing for a while. But what have you done? If you've been paying attention this week, what have we successfully actually conducted? I think Unhinged Headline might actually be sprouting roots. Do you think Unhinged Headline is sprouting roots? I think Unhinged Headline is sprouting roots. And the great thing is, I can't see it withering in the way that Woke Watch withered because of the lack of material or the diminishing amounts of material, because the Daily Telegraph has to keep publishing articles for as long as it exists. I suppose they could possibly hire a comment editor who doesn't commission bilge like this, but then what would all these people do? What would David Frost and Judith Woods and Jamie Blackett and Alison Pearson and Camilla Tominey and Sherelle Jacobs and Alistair Heath, what would they do? And I mention that because although Jamie Blackett, whoever he is, still leads the field with the EU would rather destroy the planet than let Brexit succeed, I think that Alistair Heath, the editor of the Sunday Telegraph, I think he listens to this programme and gets quite competitive. I think that Alistair Heath, who wrote "The international left-wing elites are well on their way to crushing democracy," and sundry other absolute humdingers of Unhinged headlines, I think he's really cross that this Jamie Blackett newcomer has taken his crown as the provider of the most unhinged headline. And today he's fighting back. Because today's Unhinged headline is, well, it's quite extraordinary.
Unhinged headline.
We are the West's last generation before the new dark age begins. I haven't got any funny comments to make about that. That's been published in my late father's old newspaper today in good faith and with a straight face. We are the West's last generation. What are you going to do? That'd be a good phone-in. What are you going to do before the new dark age begins? Because we are the West's last generation before the new dark age begins, according to the man who edits the Sunday Telegraph newspaper and is a senior comment writer on the Daily Telegraph. The new dark age, what are you going to do? It's a bit like what would you do if they sounded the 4-minute warning, isn't it? Do you know what John Betjeman said? John Betjeman said if they sounded the 4-minute warning, he would make his way to the haberdashery department at Peter Jones Department Store in Sloane Square, because he said, the late poet laureate, he said, nothing bad could ever happen there. In the haberdashery department at Peter Jones Department. What a beautiful thing to say. But no, it's not the 4-minute warning. It's the end of civilization. That's presuming that the EU don't destroy the planet first. So what you have here is two Daily Telegraph comment writers offering up different versions of the apocalypse. Jamie Blackett suggests that the EU will destroy the planet before it lets Brexit succeed. I think we're quite safe on that because the chances of Brexit succeeding are about the same as the chances of this writer winning a Nobel Prize for Literature. But in the alternative apocalypse under Alistair Heath, it's the new dark age that's about to begin. So the planet will survive, but presumably we'll all be drinking out of troughs and eating acorns again. So we are the West's last generation before the new dark age begins. What will you do before the new dark age begins? 0345 6060 973. Well, what is the book that you need to finish before we run out of light? What is the meal? What's the restaurant you've never visited before we resort to eating raw food again or have to survive only on what we can grow by our own fair hand? What's the box set you're going to squeeze in before your television conks out forever more? I'm only 2 episodes into Baby Reindeer at the moment, which is, I've cringed myself inside out watching that, but my goodness me, it's incredible television. Hopefully I'll get to the end of that. I think it's only 6 episodes. I'm going to get to the end of Baby Reindeer before the new dark age begins, but will I have time to get started on season 3 of Slow Horses? These are the questions that Alistair Heath has posed for all of us this morning with his very sensible and completely sane warning that we are the West's last generation before the new dark age begins.
Unhinged headline.
Back to the railways. Philip's in Coolbellup in Australia. I kid you not. What would you like to say?
Coolbellup.
Coolbellup. Carry on.
Yeah. Well, before, when they were nationalised, they were actually reasonably well run. I used to go from Newcastle to London, not often, but you get the train and you could get on and have the proper British Rail breakfast, which was a wonderful thing to have. You know, a proper sit-down breakfast, proper silver service. But the railways
that was only in first class, wasn't it?
No. Anybody could go in.
Then they changed the rules a bit later on. You had to have a first-class ticket.
All right.
But
that was the
couldn't
dining
afford a
car.
first class.
No, the dining car, wasn't it?
The dining car.
I mean, this might not have been financially efficient, Philip, despite the fact that you got your full English of a morning, which I respect the importance of that in your memories, but it doesn't necessarily speak to a well-run business.
Well, it got people on board, I think, and it was faster, really, than getting the plane, because you're right in the middle. But it was very underfunded. That's the other point. It never had enough money to do it the way it should have been done. Everything was sort of done because it was controlled, I suppose, by the Treasury. I don't know.
But isn't it supposed to make? So did they take more? Did they take money out of it, and then not spend it back on it? Because it should be able to run itself. Do you see what I mean? The profitable lines can subsidise the less profitable lines.
Yeah. I don't know.
No, nor do I. This isn't the best phoning ever.
To remember is that the Labour government nationalised all forms of transport.
Right.
In the fort, but when the Tories got in, they sold. They kept the canals, kept the railways, and sold off the profitable side, which was the road transport. So they sort of kept the government subsidising things.
Yeah.
But it was quite well run. It was all right. And you got to play.
What did you normally have for breakfast? What would be your choice or order choice normally?
Oh God, it's over 50 years ago now.
Well, you rang me. Now, that's the first thing you mentioned. I'm just doing some journalism. I'm doing some journalism, Philip. But bacon, eggs, black pudding. Beans? Beans? A bit controversial, really, on a full English.
Don't think they did beans in those days.
That's probably where they went wrong.
Get a big coffee pots.
Oh, yeah.
And
how big?
Proper coffee pot. And toast. Lots of toast. Frank Cooper's marmalade.
Frank Cooper's marmalade. What are the railways like in Coolblup?
We don't have much of a railway here in WA.
No.
Again, the Liberals. We used to have a lot of railways for freight, for wheat.
Right.
With.
Now, what do they do now? Put it in trucks. Put it in trucks, is it?
Put it in trucks and wreck the roads. Because WA is actually bigger than Texas.
That's Western Australia for people just tuning in and wondering what the hell is going on, all right? That's Philip telling us about his breakfast from 50 years ago, live from Western Australia, in a conversation about the Labour Party's plans to renationalise most passenger rail services in the UK within the next 5 years if they get into power. It's all going on here. Hold on to your hats. Bill's in Marlow. No, he's not. He's in Harlow. Bill, what would you like to say?
Well, I think the reintegration of the railways is the only logical step because they've tried fragmentation. I started work in 2001 for Balfour Beatty as an infrastructure company, then got tupied over to Network Rail and then progressed. I retired in 2020 and the integration was the only thing that would ever work. The biggest single problem is that there are so many people dipping their hands into the big pot to take the profits.
Well, that will continue in the two sectors of freight and Roscoe, the rolling stock, which I think the RMT have been calling for the nationalisation of rolling stock for years. But if people are still making a ton of money out of it, it's unlikely to see how that happens. What was the biggest mark of decline during the 20 years or so that you were working for the infrastructure company?
Well, actually, it wasn't a mark of decline. It was when we got away from the infrastructure companies that money was actually available. It then started going downhill again when it was taken back in-house because it was off the books. They took Network Rail and took it off the government books. And we actually had some money. The biggest single difference I can tell you is if I went out and I worked at one of London's busiest stations and was doing a particular job and saw something. When I worked for the infrastructure companies, Balfour's, if I saw it, I wasn't allowed to do it because they weren't going to get paid for it. When I worked for Network Rail, I was able to do what was necessary.
Okay, I get that. So that's a sort of variation on the 80 quid to change a light bulb in a hospital after the privatised companies have been given the contracts. And it's also, actually, to show why this conversation has some sort of root in reality, it's also the private sector equivalent of the carry on at your convenience crew downing tools when they were asked to make bidets instead of toilets. So that's what I meant by the pendulum. So you can have, that's a really good example, actually. So excessive privatisation consequence will be, I'm going to walk past something I can fix, but I'm not going to fix it because my company hasn't got the contract to fix it, even though I know that's going to cause a train delay later today. And then swing the pendulum all the way to trade union. I'm going to walk past something I can fix, and I'm not going to fix it because I'm a wheel tapper, and that's the job of a shunter. And if I start doing the shunters' jobs, then we'll all be toast by Christmas. Can't believe we brought it back to toast. Peter's in Solihull. Peter, what would you like to say?
Good morning.
Hello.
You can't really have a discussion about the railways.
You're telling me.
Without, yeah, thank you for the offer. Without mentioning Dr. Beeching and what happened when we had a Minister of Transport who was called Ernest Marfels, who coincidentally happened to be connected to a road transport company.
Yes,
and he asked Dr. Beeching to rationalise the railway system, which did need rationalising. But Dr. Beeching cut the heart out of the railway system so that it no longer became a proper transport system. It became a skeleton of what it used to be. It served all the mighty metropolis, but you couldn't get a train and then change at a big station and go to a little station.
Well, you exaggerate slightly. But, I mean, you could still, I'm just thinking about your neck of the woods, you can still go from Dansey to Wood End, can't you? You can still get on at Moore Street and make your way to Tamworth in Arden and stop at all the little branch lines along the way. He didn't shut it all down, and his defence would be that they closed down the inefficient or the non-profitable ones, but they went far too far. I mean, the conversation, so... We're not going to go back on that. I don't know how relevant this is to the conversation today, Peter, because nobody is going to suggest reopening stations where there isn't even any track anymore, are they?
Well, they are, in fact, doing that. I mean, there's a place called Castle... No, they're not relaying the track, but they're opening stations. There's a place called Castle Bromwich, which used to have a railway station. It used to have an aerodrome, actually. Right. But they're opening that. But, I think when we had an integrated transport system where you could get off the train, the bus would be waiting for you, you could get on the bus, you could send a parcel, they unloaded it off the train, and it went on one of these rather strange-looking transport things, and it was delivered to your door. The whole thing was integrated and it worked really smoothly.
But this is not, I mean, there's nothing in the Labour proposals that speaks to what you're describing, is there, really?
No, but if you, let me finish, but the real reason currently, talking into current day, but you have made reference to the past history, which is why I mention it.
Yes.
But why our current system is so stupid is that all our railways companies are owned by companies in France, Germany and Holland. And those are nationalised companies. So when the systems are running us now, when they make a profit, that money goes out of the country to subsidise people in Europe.
It's extraordinary that we've had successive Tory governments that are in favour of public ownership, as long as it's public ownership by foreign governments, and opposed to public ownership by our own government. Thank you, Peter. I have got a story for you which speaks directly to many of the issues that we've been discussing. But I have to warn you that if you have problems with your blood pressure or similar, you might want to listen to this sitting down, or possibly while doing a plank, which is very good for blood pressure, or a wall sit, when you sit with your back to the wall and bends your knees. It involves Thames Water. It was reported yesterday. It possibly didn't get the attention it deserves. But if you think we exaggerate sometimes when we talk about the milking of the profit pipeline to the point where the pipeline itself starts collapsing, I don't think you'll ever find a better example than the one I will share with you after this.
James O'Brien on LBC.
10 to 11 is the time. Patrick's been in touch, not entirely helpfully. He says, what do you enjoy more, James? Attempting a phone-in on road-related matters or a phone-in on trains? Yeah, you're tuned in today, aren't you? It is time to read you this story that, frankly, made my hair stand on end. They're talking about this idea of privatisation being a plan, if you like, to milk as much money out of a previously publicly owned sector as is possible before the culprits sort of waltz away to count their cash. I've always resisted that analysis slightly because it's a bit Wolfie Smith, isn't it? That's another popular culture reference that'll be lost on anybody born after 1982. But it's a bit undergraduate. It's a bit lazy. What if it's true? What if things aren't very complicated and you really are just essentially fighting an age-old generational battle between greed and a form of altruism, or self-interest that's confined to the self and self-interest that's more social in concept. So you're trying to protect society from people who are just trying to enrich themselves. I don't know. But I'll read you this. Thames Water is planning to pay out. Actually, I'm going to leave a gap in this coverage for you. I'm going to leave a space that you can fill in yourself. Thames Water is planning to pay out X pounds in dividends over the next decade, despite growing fears over the company's collapse. It's a Daily Telegraph exclusive from yesterday. I should stress that while their comment pages are a curious combination of comedy and ridiculousness, there are still some decent journalists on the newspaper doing decent journalism. This is an example of it. In a revised business plan submitted to the regulator Ofwat, bosses of the troubled supplier said they intended to keep rewarding shareholders even as financial pressures push it closer to bankruptcy. According to figures buried in a spreadsheet containing more than 100 tables, Thames Water plans to pay around X pounds in dividends between now and 2035, consisting of payouts of up to X million pounds a year. It also includes around, and now I'll start filling in the gaps for you, £860 million in dividends between next year and 2030. Shareholders had pledged to invest more than the £750 million by 2025 before they cut off funding last month. And now with the gaps filled in, Thames Water is planning to pay out £2 billion in dividends over the next decade, despite growing fears over the company's collapse. In many ways, I'm not going to lie to you, the phoning about the railways has not gone as well as I hoped. It's no one's fault but mine. Clive has been in touch to suggest that I should have done more homework, and Clive may well have a point. But in many ways, the conversation that I wanted to have about the railways is the same as the conversation that we would have about water. If I said to you that on the day after the Telegraph published its report that Thames Water plans a £2 billion shareholder payout, despite the threat of collapse, appears the day before, the Times reports that only 14% of people are likely to swim in Britain's seas and rivers this summer because of raw sewage. Figures released last month showed that sewage spills in England doubled to 3.6 million hours last year. And the question I want to ask, and I think I possibly failed properly to communicate to you, is how has that happened? How have we seen railway companies provide fortunes for their shareholders, including foreign governments who own companies, same with water actually, while the service that the customer enjoys has gone off a metaphorical cliff? And with the railways, the second part of that question would then become, do the Labour plans to renationalise the passenger services, to bring passenger services into public control? They're careful not to use the word nationalise in their documentation. But does that represent any particular hope for the future from the perspective of passengers? And somewhere in there is a précis of modern politics. Somewhere in that tension between profits for shareholders and provision for punters, customers, users, passengers, somewhere in there is the essence of 21st and 20th century politics in this country. Tony asks, when does the Thames Water scandal become criminal? And I don't know whether that's a rhetorical question or not, Tony, but that figure of £2 billion, even as the company teeters upon the brink of bankruptcy, and the water for which it has responsibility, or the services for which it has responsibility, stand responsible for a large contribution to the 3.6 million hours last year in England alone that saw sewage spilling into our waterways. And 10:55 is the time. And oddly, I stumbled across a speech from the last couple of days made by Mark Carney, former governor of the Bank of England, this morning, when I was busy, Clive, researching for the programme, busy doing my homework, although possibly not the right homework. But I was struck by this because I think he nails one of the reasons why this kind of stuff happens. I think he, and remember, there are two types of people in this country: people who think that the former governor of the Bank of England understands matters economic, and people who think that Jacob Rees-Mogg does. Okay, and I don't even say that mischievously. There will be people listening to this programme now who genuinely think, I'm not listening to that Mark Carney. What's Jacob Rees-Mogg got to say about it? So there are two types of people. It's that you can divide the entire country along these lines. Who would you trust more? Mark Carney, one of the world's leading central bankers and former governor of the Bank of England, whose predictions about a variety of issues have been proved right, although, of course, economic forecasts are never infallible, or Jacob Rees-Mogg, a penny farthing in human form who has been proved categorically wrong about everything to do with the single biggest political issue of his entire career. So who are you going to trust more? And there are people listening to this programme at this moment going, well, Jacob Rees-Mogg, obviously. Shish, you communist. Anyway, this is Mark Carney speaking a couple of days ago.
Some right-wing populists that see current anxieties as an opportunity to stoke anger because anger is what's necessary for their project. After all, people don't demolish things when they're positive or optimistic. I know this. I know this from my time in the UK, where for years the rallying cry of Brexiters was broken Britain. And their solution to take back control was actually code for tear down your future. So while Brexiters promised that they were going to create Singapore on the Thames, the Truss government actually delivered Argentina on the Channel. Broken Britain. Does that sound familiar? When politicians claim our great democracies are broken, it's not because they want to fix them. It's because they want a license to demolish.
And, of course, you can say the same about our judicial system, membership of the European Convention on Human Rights, even NATO membership, if you listen to Donald Trump sometimes. And I just thought that was worth playing to you because he's actually warning Canadian voters. He's warning Canadian people about the dangers coming in from similar political projects to the one that he saw kick in here. And it sat, I thought, very gently with the David Cameron quotes from yesterday, which the Daily Mail today attacks and the only people it can bring into the public space to attack David Cameron are Nigel Farage and Jacob Rees-Mogg, because what he says here is just true.
Hand on heart, if this had come up when you were PM, would you have gone for this policy?
Well, we had a totally different situation because we had a situation where you could return people directly to France. Now, I'd love that situation to be the case again. That's the most sensible thing. People land on a beach in Kent, you take them straight back to France, you therefore break the model of the people's budget.
So shouldn't you be trying to get that?
Well, that's not available at the moment. It's simply not possible at the moment.
Because of Brexit?
Well, because of the situation we're in, because of the attitude of others and all the rest of it. It's not available at the moment. So you've got a choice. Do nothing. That is the Keir Starmer choice. Talk about it, talk about faster processing, talk about this, but ultimately do nothing. Or you take innovative action to say, if you come to Britain illegally on a small boat, you're not going to stay. So therefore, don't come. That's the choice.
So the actual Foreign Secretary conceding that one of the main reasons why we're in such a pickle on one area of policy is a direct consequence of the Brexit that most of the UK media continues to either completely ignore or pretend is going well. And the former governor of the Bank of England, who has been proved right about almost everything, explains the motivation of the people who brought you Brexit as being a desire to break things, usually in the belief, sometimes justly and sometimes misplaced, that it will end up enriching them and their mates. And again, why is it only me telling you this stuff? I'll leave you to work that out for yourself. And luckily, the paperback of How They Broke Britain comes out today, so if you want to understand all of it in forensic detail, then you can do so for under a tenner.
James O'Brien on LBC.
4 minutes after 11 is the time. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we turn our attention next to a story that should really have gone away ages ago. It was in the 2019 manifesto, would you believe? Who can remember who was the 2019 general election fought between? Anybody? Bueller? Who's the 2019 manifesto election, and I think the 2017 one as well, that Theresa May pledged to get rid of no-fault evictions. When was that one? Was that 2017? And then by 2019, it was Johnson. If only there was a book that just detailed all of this period of British history in forensic and best-selling detail. I guess someone's going to have to write. What's that you say? Someone already has? Oh, gosh. It definitely contained no-fault evictions. No-fault evictions were definitely in the 2019 manifesto, and I think they might have been in the 2017 manifesto as well. And yet you have a situation yesterday in the House of Commons where they managed to pass legislation which appears to have annoyed absolutely everybody. There are two camps here. Let me begin. Shall I tell you the way this works, if we turn our attention towards rental? I like conversations about rental because they're nuanced and complicated, and a lot of people refuse to accept that. So regardless of how I conduct the next 10 minutes of introduction, I will get accusations of both portraying all landlords as being venal and corrupt, and I'll also get accusations of being a fully paid up member of the owning classes who's happy to profit at the expense of ordinary hard-working people, because it's nuanced, right? I joke off-air sometimes, listening to other programmes. I joke off-air about the world's smallest violin. Oh, won't somebody think of the landlords? But if you're a landlord, and in the last couple of years, and this, of course, perhaps explains why that 2019 manifesto pledge remains undelivered, if Liz Truss and other factors have seen the mortgage payments you make, the mortgage repayments you make on a property that you let out go up by 50%, say, then you cannot but pass on some of that to your tenants. And if your tenants can't afford it, then you can't really sustain their tenancy. If you are going to be landlording at a loss, then you need either to get rid of your property or to replace the tenants who can't afford the new rent with tenants who can. I hate that, by the way. And under my glorious rule, you would have to put your income from rentals into some sort of fund from which, if the economic, you'd have to put some of it into some sort of fund from which you would be able to make up shortfalls in future rents from profits on past rents. I don't know whether that makes me sound incredibly naive, incredibly stupid, or like some sort of economic visionary, or whether indeed it exists in other countries. But the simple fact that, I can't afford to be a landlord anymore, therefore I'm going to chuck my tenants out onto the street or double their rent, is a brutal consequence of the fact, very simply, that landlords can do that. But lots of landlords are good landlords. Some landlords do either make less money than they otherwise might, or make barely any money at all as a consequence of the economic changes that we've seen in the last few years, and they look after their tenants. I've had all sorts of landlords over the years. Like, I've been a homeowner since I got married, and that's 25 years next year. But before that, I did all sorts of renting. And I did a thing the other day when, I've told you that I've really got into Lime bikes. I went to a house I used to live in Battersea, going back to 1991, 92, a little student house that we had in Battersea. We could only afford it because, well, you don't need to know the grisly details, but my girlfriend at the time's father didn't know that we shared a room. So we had 4 rents, if you like, or 3 rents for 2 bedrooms, or 4 rents for 3 bedrooms. And I went back there just to have a look, and I didn't recognise it at all. I just never gone to that corner of South London since I left for some reason, and I didn't recognise it at all. If I couldn't remember the number, I wouldn't have known which house it was. I didn't realise it was on the end of a row. I'd forgotten it was a maisonette. I'd forgotten that there was we had 2 stories, and there was another 2-story property above us. I'd forgotten that. I'd for some reason, because it had a back garden, I forgot it had another property upstairs. It's going back, a fair old time, 35 years or something. But the thing I remembered about that property was the precariousness of it. Because one friend moved out, and unless we could find someone else to move in, we were going to lose it in at the end of the month. There was no protection. And I know I was only a student, and I rented properties. I usually rented rooms from friends after that, after I left college, which is a very different proposition because they owned the property. So, if I was on my uppers, I could take a break and pay back the difference a couple of months later or something like that. But I found the precariousness of it quite significant on the return, and yet that is, compared to being 52 as I am now and living with the precariousness of a no fault eviction, as a father, I find that almost unthinkable. And I know how obnoxious that might sound if you don't know that this is coming from a place of empathy and concern, and you think it's coming from a place of ignorance and even criticism. Quite the opposite. I don't think it's unreasonable to expect landlords, to demand that landlords provide degrees of certainty to their tenants. I really don't. And if the price that we have to pay for that is some landlords suffering a bit, that is a price that I can weigh up on one side of the scales against every tenant in the country living with the kind of precariousness that I've just described. And I can conclude with enormous ease that, unfortunate though it is that some landlords may suffer from these sort of legislations, tough, because the alternative is to put everybody who is renting in a position of utterly unfair precariousness. And this is a point so obvious that even Michael Gove could see it. Michael Gove, that put his name to these plans to reform rent, and who earlier this week, as Oliver Dowden didn't seem to understand in the House of Commons yesterday, but as Angela Rayner repeatedly pointed out, they've essentially abandoned the protection of tenants, the protection of renters from no-fault evictions. And the Tory party is such a hot mess at the moment that they actually have people rebelling against, they have people complaining about the legislation when it was being assembled from both sides of the argument. One Conservative MP called the bill a betrayal because it didn't bring in a ban on no-fault evictions. It agreed to a delay on any ban on no-fault evictions or a requirement for a minimum 6-month tenancy. So if you move in January, you can't get chucked out in March if you've kept up your side of the bargain. But other Tory MPs, this is from the same party, who are landlords and who get to legislate on what laws... I mean, that's a bit uncomfortable as well, isn't it? What's that? You say, how many properties does Jeremy Hunt own? He owns half of Surrey. Not literally. It's a figure of speech. But he owns so many properties, he forgot he owned 12. Do you remember that? I think, was it the Register of Members' Interests? Oh, yes, you're quite right. There's another 12 flats in Surrey. And these, they're not all going to be as rich as Jeremy Hunt, but all of these landlords on the Tory benches have been agitating against laws designed to make life easier for tenants. There's something really rotten about that, I think. If you're, I don't know, what do you do? Require them to sit it out? I'm afraid if you have a rental property, you're going to have to recuse yourself from this. Or could you argue that they're the ones who should be listened to more because they understand the issues even better? And so on the other side of the Tory party, you've got people complaining that the climb down has not gone far enough. They haven't climbed down far enough. A chap called Anthony Mangnall, who's been leading that faction of Tories, saying that it's going to interfere with property rights and lead to landlords deserting the market. And I thought that was fascinating. He said the consequences of removing fixed-term tenancies is essentially the state turning around and saying to individuals what they can and cannot do with their own properties. To which my response is, yes, that is true. There will be rules governing what you can and cannot do with your own properties if other people live in them. And I don't think that's politically even controversial. It's a certain type of Tory that cannot get their head around the tension here between property ownership and basic humanity. You can't tell me what to do with my own property. I've got 48 children living in a hole at the bottom of my garden. And absolutely, you just say, no, there's property and there's property. There's property that is an asset. And there's property that is somebody else's home. And then there's property that is both an asset and somebody else's home. And if there is somebody else's home, then what is the point of having a society if society does not enact legislation to protect the people living in that home from the potential greed of the person that owns it? Or from the whimsy of the person that owns it? Or from the cruelty of the person that owns it? It's not outlawing landlording, although there might well be a case for that. It is simply saying that you cannot chuck those people out because you've suddenly lost a bit of money on the horses, or you can't afford to be a landlord, I would argue, if you can't afford to provide a fixed 6-month tenancy. If your financial arrangements are so delicate that 2 months of receiving no rent will mean that you can't afford to keep the mortgage payments up on the house, then you've got no business being a landlord. Now, I know that this in some ways pushes the privilege of being a landlord back towards the very wealthy and takes it away from the middle classes and the retired people doing it as an investment. But again, I cannot really get my head around why I'm supposed to worry about you more than I worry about the family over there that are going to be out on their arse because the landlord has done his sums wrong or endured a little bit of bad luck. And that seems to be the tension that has riddled the Tory party on this issue. On the one hand, won't somebody think of the landlords? And on the other hand, all I want is a modicum of certainty that my home will be my home for a fixed period of time. So that's the politics of it. Fill your boots, 0345 6060 973. The question I have for you is what it's like to live with precariousness. What it's like to, and I mean this high-level precariousness. We're all, what do they say? We're all 2 paychecks away from oblivion, or, working out what will happen if the wheels fall off. How long will you have? How long will you be able to sustain even a semblance of your current lifestyle if it all goes wrong? I don't mean that. I mean that you're keeping your end of the bargain. You are doing everything right. You are playing the game, and you rent your family home. You rent your property. What is it like to know that you can be turfed out at any point? 0345 6060 973, because I don't think people like Anthony Mangnall have ever stopped to think about that. Someone just check whether he's a landlord himself, will you? And then let me know. You can WhatsApp 0345 6060 973. I don't think that they even think about, when they make these pompous pronouncements about the state turning around and saying to individuals what they can and cannot do with their own properties. You are turning around and saying to individuals what they can and cannot do with their own home, up to and including staying in it for a fixed period of time, not forever, but you just know that you're safe until June, or you know that you're safe until Christmas, or you know that it's yours until 2025. And these people seem to be resisting that. So what's it like to live with the precariousness? 0345 6060 973. And why should landlords not be forced to accept a ban on no-fault evictions and introduce a requirement for a minimum of 6-month tenancies? If you can't stomach either of those things, then you need to stop eating avocado toast. You need to cancel your Netflix subscription. You need to stop going on so many fancy holidays or going to Glastonbury every year. If you can't afford, as a landlord, to accommodate a ban on no-fault evictions and a requirement for a minimum 6-month tenancy, then you've got no business being a landlord. You should jog on. There's almost certainly stuff I'm missing here, but there's an awful lot I'm not. Hit the numbers now, you will get through. And you will get through on this. 0345 60, because you've got to have proper insights. And I'm not having lazy, I'd sold a house in 1964 kind of stuff. I want to know, A, what it's like to live today with the knowledge that you could be out on your ear any minute now. There's nothing you can do to have certainty or support, but equally the politics of saying to tenants, tough, and saying to landlords, oh yes, of course, it's completely unreasonable to expect you. Is there any other business where you can be so bad at it that you can't offer any guarantees to your customers? You're allowed to just sell them something and then take it away from them, or rent them something and take it away from them at any point, at any moment, even if they've paid their dues, even if they've paid their subs, even if they've kept up their end of the bargain. You can just turn around and rip up the contract and wave goodbye whenever you want. It's Victorian. In fact, the more you think about it, the more Dickensian it becomes. Unless, of course, it doesn't. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. It's 11:19.
James O'Brien on LBC.
21 minutes after 11 is the time. So the reality of renting in 2024, particularly with reference to the government's failure yesterday to deliver on a 2019 manifesto promise to both ban no-fault evictions and require landlords to introduce minimum 6-month tenancies. What's it like to live with that uncertainty? And the politics of it. Is it really revolutionary or even remotely left-wing to suggest that if landlords can't afford to accommodate those two requirements, then they're in the wrong business? That's all. I'm not calling for a redistribution of wealth, and maybe some problems would arise because if you can't, if we take all the landlords out of the equation who can't really afford to be landlords, can't afford to be good landlords, can't afford to be fair and decent landlords, if we remove all the landlords who maybe even quite like to be fair and decent landlords, but they can't afford it, then would the whole rental market collapse under the weight of their exodus? I don't know. Julie's in Liverpool. Julie, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi. It's not me in the situation, but my daughter, who's 23. She's moved down south to Colchester, and they signed, her and her partner, signed a lease for 12 months for a flat.
Yeah.
Now, they realised that there was a clause that after 6 months it could be, ended.
Right.
Anyway, they moved in December. And then a couple of weeks ago, they'd come home from work and the lights were on in the flat and they were going, what's going on here? Because as though somebody had been in the flat. And then a couple of days later, the front door just opened and a bloke just walked in and said, I'm viewing the flat.
Crikey.
To buy it. A few days later, the same thing happened again, and my daughter was in there on her own.
Well, someone had given a potential buyer the keys, or it was an estate agent showing people around?
Yeah, well, they weren't with an estate agent. They were on their own. And then about 3 weeks ago, she rang me. She didn't want to upset me.
No.
And she said the door was just going again, but we'd put the safety chain on because we were both in. And it was a surveyor. And he was trying to access the house, the flat. And he said, didn't you know it had been put up for sale? And it had been put up for sale a month after they signed the lease.
Really?
And no one had told him.
Well, he might be in breach of the law as it stands.
It's a lady.
That's no lady, Julie. She might be in breach of the law as it stands anyway, but clearly not sufficiently fearful of consequences or retribution to have behaved differently. It's no life living like that, is it?
Well, no. The point is, they don't want to get on the wrong side of it.
No.
Because, she could evict them, because that's what they do. Or equally, the new buyer might want to keep them on as, say, sitting tenants.
Yeah.
But they just don't know what the situation is. So they're trying to look for a flat, because obviously you only get 2 months' notice to leave.
And that's it. I mean, 2 months' notice to leave is the opposite of certainty, and it changes everything as well, Julie. As you know, it means you're not going to make improvements. You're not going to settle down. You're never. I don't know whether anyone's ever measured the psychological impact. Jane's in Brighton. She says, I asked my grown-up son what was the worst thing about growing up that affected you, and he said moving so many times. We had to move 10 times in 25 years. Owners got divorced and needed to sell. This is landlords. We had a rat problem that couldn't be resolved, carbon monoxide problem with an old boiler that they wouldn't replace, on and on and on and on and on. Luckily, we found a property in the end. But for your son to say that, 20, growing up, I wonder whether the psychological impact is something that Anthony Mangnall would care about if someone explained it to him, or whether he would feel that his suffering as a landlord who's not allowed to do whatever he wants with the homes that he owns, in which other people's homes that he owns, the trauma of not being able to tell them to sling their hook whenever he feels like it might outweigh the trauma of being told to sling your hook whenever your landlord feels like it. Sue's in Romford. Sue, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James.
Hello, Sue.
This isn't my own personal experience, but I have a friend, and she was renting a house from the same landlord for just over 12 years. And it's in an area of outstanding natural beauty and a seaside. And so she ended up getting a no-fault eviction. She's 58 years old. the landlord can make more money doing it as a holiday let.
Yeah.
And she's now living in a caravan on somebody's drive, and she doesn't know what her future holds. And that's her home. She was renting for 12 years.
And she'd put down roots then?
Yeah.
And she can't find anywhere else in the area, as it were?
No, because the rent is just
Well, this is the problem, isn't it? So she was obviously on quite a good deal, was she, previously?
Well, yeah, I mean,
she must have been, but there's no security. Yeah.
And, you know, she always made her payments over those 12 years. But, you know, sort of in the area that she lives, nobody can afford to rent. It's all second homes and holiday lets.
It's going to be a bit of an anomaly by dint of being an area of national beauty, but outstanding natural beauty, but not a massive anomaly, because loads of people who were landlords have seen the opportunities to make more money by doing very short-term lets via Airbnb or organisations like that. So how would you change the law, Sue?
I think there is a place for private landlords.
There has to be.
And private rentals, because there are people that move around a lot, but there needs to be more social housing.
It's not going to help your friend, is it?
No, it's not.
But it will help future. It will help future her.
Yeah. Another option might be.
So social housing is rental accommodation that is not owned by landlords who either lack the morality or the finances to be good landlords.
Yeah, I mean, I rent. I'm a council tenant.
Okay.
I've got a secure tenancy.
What does that mean for people who don't know? What does that mean?
It means that unless I turn into a really obnoxious sort of neighbour, sort of terrorising
unless you break the terms of your lease on the grounds of criminality or antisocial behaviour, which is very hard to prove, but there are some limits on your behaviour, Sue.
Absolutely. Yes. Or if I did something, you know, to really damage the interior of the flat, this is my home. This is my home until they carry me out in a box, in effect.
Well, let's hope that day is long distant. But you bring us back. You bring us back to the conversation we had in the first hour about the water and the railways, the difference between public ownership and private ownership. Yeah. These landlords want to suck the pipeline of profit dry, or at least to suck as much out of it as they possibly can. And in the way that sewage gets pumped into our waterways, so your poor friend gets pumped into a caravan.
Yeah.
So that somebody else somewhere can make more money than they would otherwise have made, even though the money they would have made before was perfectly adequate. Thank you very much. I'd like more, please.
Yeah. Yeah.
Crikey, I should have spotted those signs earlier, Sue. It's only because you explained it all so well that I saw the parallels with the railways and the water company. So in many ways, the landlord-tenant relationship, when you introduce social housing, as Sue just did so powerfully, is similar to the sort of shareholder-customer relationship. And what Anthony Magnell is saying as a landlord or as a champion of landlords is, I don't care about the people living in the house. I don't care about the people who want to swim in the rivers. I don't care about the people who travel by train. How dare anybody try to put limits on how much money I can make out of this asset, whether it's a share in a water company, a share in a railway company, or somebody else's home. It's 11:30. Amelia Cox has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
11:32 is the time. It's always a tension, isn't it? It's a tension between interests. In this case, the interests of the landlord versus the interests of the tenant, and it's why controlling the discourse is so important as well. Whether you're talking about anything or trying to control the discourse, whether you're talking about anything from the Middle East to the state of the railways. And somehow the idea that landlords don't have it easy has really taken root in this country. Perhaps it's a consequence of who controls the levers of power, or who controls or has the most influence over discourse. But, you know, the idea really that you can't chuck people out for no reason, regardless of the difficulties that causes you. You knew when you signed up to be a landlord that from now on you can't chuck people out with no reason. And you can't have a tenancy that's less than 6 months. And if you can't handle that, then invest the money in something else. Invest the money that you've invested in property in something else. You might not get the same returns, and there's a fundamental unfairness here that favours the rich, but hey-ho, the alternative is communism. Capitalism favours the rich, always has done, always will. That's why they like it so much. Mark's in Tamworth in Staffordshire. Mark, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James.
Hello,
I recently retired from the police force and took on a job as a housing solutions officer for a local borough council. Basically, I deal with all the renters who have given Section 21 notices and faced with homelessness, and work on their cases and try and alleviate their situation or prevent them from becoming homeless.
Right.
Now, I knew nothing about the rental sector before I started the job. I'd always been lucky enough to be an owner-occupier since we were very young. We were lucky enough to be with that part of the generation. I think we bought our first house for £32,000.
Yeah.
Does it all, really, doesn't it?
It does, yeah.
It's a different world. You can't even buy a car for that now, can you?
Right.
So, literally, it's a case of it was all new to me. And I was immediately very shocked at the attitude that people will take on what is seen as an investment. And as we're all told when we invest in things, the value of your investment can go up as well as go down. You could take this risk. They're not prepared to take the rough with the smooth at all.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong, there's some very good landlords out there that are almost parental in nature, and they would do nothing to see harm or...
What a lovely way of putting it. That's a really it's a lovely way of putting it.
Yeah. But what has struck me is losing a home. The only thing I've seen that's more traumatic that affects people is losing a loved one. I thought I'd seen trauma in the police where you go and give death messages and things like that. But the stress that's caused by losing a home and the insecurity for the family and the children is just devastating. It causes so much. And then you've got all the added baggage on society that goes with it, the mental health issues that come from it. And we're living through a cost of living crisis at the moment that's been intensified for landlords as well by the recent upheaval with the interest rates. And, with news this week that interest rates aren't going to go down and, lenders rise, making their rates higher again, all those buy-to-let mortgages that are coming up for renewal are just becoming unaffordable for landlords. And
are these the reason? Is this is the main reason why you're seeing Section 21 evictions? Is it?
Yeah.
The landlords who just can't afford. So they've made money for years, or they've had quite a good deal for years, and suddenly now they've had the smooth. Here comes the rough. So they're out of it. They're out, and never mind the fact that pulls the rug, metaphorical and literal, from beneath the feet of their tenants.
Yeah, I'll give you an example. I mean, the average landlord on the average property in my sort of area would make somewhere between £300, £350, £400 a month on their rent, on a property. The way that interest rates have gone, the new mortgages, they're not making anything. So when they've got to pay to have their boiler serviced every year and the boiler certificate done, before they even start paying, anything, there's no profit in it. They're actually losing £100. So they're not making anything and they're not prepared to take that. The only issue that we've got going forward is that's going to intensify. If soon as you get any sort of deadline for a repeal of Section 21 and the current laws, there'll be a big rush of people trying to get it in before it goes.
Yeah.
So you're coming up to sort of you've not seen anything yet. You're coming up to the perfect storm.
So are you speaking from a nuanced position of some understanding of why they've delayed it? Because I think that this is what the Tories...
Well, no, I mean, from a personal...
Because you can't bring it in... Hang on, let me get this thought out before it disappears.
Yeah.
You can't bring it in until there's a proper mechanism and system in place to deal with what you've just described. That would be the argument used by Anthony Mangnall, the leader of the Tory MPs, pressing for changes. He would want the landlords to have... Before you bring these rules in, there has to be a mechanism in place to somehow prevent the exodus, the avalanche that you describe.
Yeah, I should imagine so. Like I said, there's got to be some safeguard, because if you're a landlord and if you've got, if you're a hobby landlord, you've got one or two properties, or you've got a large portfolio, and you're looking at what things are going to happen in the next 12 months, or 18 months, you're planning ahead, and then somebody says, actually, we're going to get rid of Section 21 now. All you're going to do is you're going to go through your portfolio, you're going to pick the worst properties that you've got, or with the tenants, unfortunately, you think, they might not be financially stable going forward. And you're just going to have a call. That's it. While you've got chance. So there would have to be some mechanism afterwards. You can't have like I said, there are good landlords. You can't have landlords taking the all the impact of mismanagement of the financial situation and the rental market for eons, because that's what's basically brought it about. There's got to be some protection there for them. But on the same time, you've got to have something there to protect all these renters.
I'm trying to think of other areas of avalanche. Yeah, you see, I should helpful call this, but because everything you say makes sense. I'm reading an article that Anthony Mangel wrote for his local paper, where he somehow manages to bring the murder of Sarah Everard into his defence of his position on landlords and tenants. But he talks about the ending of no-fault evictions, while welcome, must be accompanied by a realistic mechanism for landlords to rely upon. So that's roughly what we're nibbling at. But there aren't many other businesses where you make a profit for 20 years and then circumstances change. I'm thinking, what if you owned a VHS video rental shop at Blockbuster a few years ago, and then everything suddenly went into streaming, and you launch a sort of campaign to say, well, hang on a minute, you need to give us some money. People aren't renting videos. Do you see what I mean? I can't think of many areas where capital or wealth or the investment, the people who've made the investment expect some form of protection from the vagaries of a market, because they will make a profit from that asset, and they have made a profit from that asset, but there might just now be a little period of time where they don't make much profit from their asset, and they should somehow be compelled to suck that up.
Yeah, that's the thing that shocked me, is like, if I invested in gilts and bonds, I'd be warned that my profit can go, I can lose money as well as make money, and it's the same in this market, but they're not prepared to do that. And the other thing, if you like, is there's lots of other avenues. If you've got a bad tenant as a landlord, there's lots of other avenues you can use to get rid of that tenant. So if they're not paying the rent, or it's antisocial behaviour, or the smashing up your property, there's lots of ways already there to get rid of that tenant. What we're looking at are tenants that are doing nothing wrong. They're doing everything that they're supposed to do. They're paying their rent, but the landlord's saying, no, I've had enough of you. I either want to make more money, or I'm not making any money anymore. Sorry, your time's gone, and I want you out, and I want somebody who's going to pay an extra £200, £300 a month. Or, as it's happening with a lot of them, they're just, getting rid of tenants and just selling up and cashing in on their investment after having the properties for X amount of years.
Because they might not have the income from it, but they've still got the appreciation in value that they've enjoyed since they bought it in the first place. Finally, Mark, and a bit lazy of me, but if, as someone who arrived objectively in this sector, not quite unexpectedly, you knew what job you were applying for, but with no experience or real understanding of the dynamics in play, the system as it stands, if I wanted you to ratio it, and like say 52-48 in favour of landlord versus tenant, where would you put the numbers? As it stands now, how would you describe the balance in who has got the power?
Oh, it's fast at the moment with Section 21. It's vastly stacked in favour of the landlord, because at any given point,
60-40, 70-30, 80-20.
Oh, 85-15.
Wow.
The only inconvenience the landlord will get is that he can serve a Section 21 notice, and the tenant can say, "No, I'm not going." And then at the end of the Section 21 notice, a minimum of 2 months, the landlord would then have to go for a possession order at court, which will cost them £425 at local county court. But the tenant then gets, because they'll always find in favour of the landlord, because it's the law.
Yeah.
They're allowed to do this. So the tenant then gets whacked with the costs at court as well. The possession order comes in, and then to get the property back, they then have to go to court again and get a bailiff's eviction warrant. So, the fact of you can sign up for a 2-year tenancy, if you like, be the perfect tenant, pay your rent, look after the property, modernise it, do work, and then this landlord will come along and say, "No, I've had enough, thank you very much, I want you out in 2 months." And you're palace. There's nothing you can do about it apart from sit there and say, "I'm not going," and end up being taken to court, which is traumatic in itself. You've got people, who've never been near a court in their lives, having to appear in court in front of a judge, and the judge turning around and saying, "Well, why haven't you got out this property?" Well, a lot of these families can't go back into the rental market afterwards as well, because if they signed a lease, they've been in these properties, they are paying vastly under the market rate at the moment because they signed up to a long lease originally. It's not their fault they did it. It was a good move for them to get locked into a lease with a reasonable rent, and now they're coming out into a market where they can't afford to privately rent, and then that puts extra pressure on the social housing register because it's their only avenue to get home.
You, mate, you're an expert. When did you change jobs? When did you start working as a housing officer?
7 months ago. I was a traffic officer for 20 years before that. I've been on your show before.
I recognise your accent, actually. I recognise your accent, Mark. But you've picked it up quickly, haven't you, in 7 months?
Yeah, well, I'm one of those people that's sadly very interested in law and how it works. Yes. And I wanted to learn about a different part of law. So I went into something where I could learn about homelessness law.
Wow.
And it is fascinating when you dig down into it. I mean, I deal with all sorts. I specialise in sort of care leavers and
knowledge is power. Knowledge is power, isn't it?
And stuff like that. But this part of it's particularly interesting, especially if you like the political aspect of it and what the effects will be and the ramifications of interest rates going up and people losing out on investments and how it impacts on your local community and the social side of it too. Yeah.
Well, we're very lucky to have had you on today, actually, because you just cut through quite a lot of the noise with absolute clarity and a sort of laser-like focus on the salient facts, which comes from the enthusiasm you have for understanding them. I of course, remain married to analogies. And quite a few of you, Ben, Chris, Mark, have pointed out when I made that point about the area in which circumstances change and your investment becomes considerably less valuable than it was before, you would demand compensation from the authorities or the system. Slave trade, a lot of you have pointed out, actually, that it still comes as a surprise to me when I'm reminded that when slavery was abolished, the compensation was paid to the slave owners, one of whom is in the news today, who is also, would you believe, a Conservative MP and, wait for it, a landlord.
James O'Brien on LBC.
11:48 is the time. So it wasn't really a teaser. I wasn't planning to keep it from you, but you may not have seen the story. The Prime Minister of Barbados, Mia Mottley, has halted plans for a multi-million-pound payout to the Conservative MP Richard Drax for the purchase of 53 acres of the Drax Hall plantation in Barbados, which he owns and on which his forebears made a ton of money from enslaved human beings. There was a lot of anger. The Observer reported it on Sunday because many people felt that he should be compelled to hand over all or part of the 617-acre plantation to the people of Barbados, and therefore the plans to buy it, the Prime Minister has stepped in to halt them. His ancestors built the sugar plantation in the mid-17th century and worked it with enslaved people for 200 years. And that's just funny. Not funny, ha-ha. Because when I asked that question, I was asking it rhetorically. I said, what other areas are there where you make an investment and it's very, very profitable for you, and then circumstances change and it isn't, but you expect to be protected from the vagaries of the economy? And you pointed out to me slavers who got compensated when slavery was abolished. The money wasn't given to the people who'd been working on these plantations, it was given to the people who owned them. And bankers. I'm not personally bailed out, but the banks as institutions bailed out. And if you listen to Gordon Brown and Alistair Darling, you'll understand why they had to be, the late Alistair Darling, you'll understand why they had to be bailed out to keep the wheels turning, but still too big to fail, if you like. So the banks get bailed out. And then I remembered when I first started doing this, not here, when I first started offering up or being paid for opinions, the Lloyds of London story was quite big. And the more I looked at it, the more I sort of felt a political crystallisation happening inside me. Because what happened, if you were a Lloyd's name, you had made a really good sum of money for a very long time because the things that you were underwriting didn't happen. So, the ship didn't sink, the oil rig didn't catch fire, but the people that owned it were still paying money to Lloyd's every year so that if something did go wrong, they would get compensation. You know how insurance works, but it's worth reminding. But because Lloyd's names traditionally were quite patrician, they were quite posh, wealthy people, when Lloyd's endured a succession of catastrophes and had to pay out so much money that the Lloyd's names, who'd been making tidy little profits on their investments every year for forever, they suddenly lost a lot of money. There was absolute outrage and uproar, rich people losing. And I remember reading it and saying to my dad at the time, I said, what's the difference between being a Lloyd's name and popping into Ladbrokes to put a couple of £100 on a horse or to put 20 quid on a horse? And then when the horse loses, complain that your last 10 bets have won, so you should be given some sort of compensation for the fact that your latest bet has lost. And Dad said, there's not really any difference at all, son, except class. except where they come from, except who they are. And I kind of find myself thinking about that today as I read one Conservative MP essentially arguing that landlords should be able to do whatever the hell they like with their properties, even if those properties are somebody else's home. There's a huge imbalance there. Huge imbalance. And yet, I guess it's so baked into our society that we don't notice how unequal and unfair it is. 11:52 is the time. Mick's in Plymouth. Mick, what would you like to say?
Oh, good morning, James. How are you doing?
Very well indeed, mate.
Second time caller, long time texter, still nervous, though.
Well done. It gets easier. It gets easier. It's like going to the dentist. Go on.
Right, just to give you a perspective of what it's like to have Section 21 hanging over you.
Yes.
Private renter. Our landlord bought the house for $40,000 in 2004. I know people inside London can't believe that. We moved in 2016. We've paid over £70,000 in rent.
Yeah.
Last June, we had a major problem with our bathroom. We were told that we can't use it. We've got 2 kids, 1 disabled.
Yeah.
We dare not put our head above the parapet to complain, because we'd heard on the grapevine from other people who've got houses with this guy that he's going to sell some.
So that was literally what Mark just said. He'll be looking at. We don't want to get rid of them all, but when he's deciding which ones to get rid of, then noisy tenants could well be a consideration.
Exactly. I mean, we weren't noisy in any way. We paid our rent.
No, I know you weren't. I mean, you know what I mean.
Yeah,
you know what I mean.
Yeah, a problem property, not problem tenant.
Yeah. God.
So he could quite easily just turn around, sell it, make a massive profit on what he bought it for.
What he paid for it in 2004.
And he's had 20 years of income.
What do you think it does to you? It's one of those questions that we can't really answer because we haven't got the other path, the life not lived, have we? The life where you bought it in 2004 and
sure.
It's yours. But how do you think it does affect you? That quiet uncertainty, that constant uncertainty.
Despair. It's
absolutely
despair because we've looked around the area that we're in for other rental properties, and our house isn't great, but we love it. But moving into something comparable, we cannot afford it. Just as simple as that. We cannot afford it. We would have to go to shelter or go to the council. And bearing in mind, this house has had no work done on it since the time that we've been there.
Yeah.
So it's going to take thousands to get it right. So he'd just sell it as it is, take money and run.
And it is a consequence of a system skewed enormously in favour of landlords. So no requirement, even if there is, it's not enforced to improve the conditions that you describe. No requirement when things go bad to use the money when things were going well to make up the shortfall. The idea that landlords deserve more protection in law it's Kafkaesque, isn't it? It's absurd to the point of comedy.
Any other business, let's say car leasing.
Yeah.
When you lease a car, it's based on the value of the car at the end of it. That's how they work out how much you pay for.
Of course it is, yeah.
If the market crashes and all of a sudden the second-hand car market is worth nothing, you're not going to turn around as a leasing company and say halfway through it, well, we're not going to make anything now, so I'll tell you what, we'll have your car back.
We'll have your car back, yeah.
Yeah.
I suppose the laws, going back to the mists of time, would have been made by the landlords originally, wouldn't they?
Of course.
Just sitting in the House of Commons. You had to be a landowner. You had to essentially be a landlord to be allowed to be an MP.
I hate to rush you, James, because I've got to get to work. But
you crack on. You crack on. You take care. Go on quickly. Yeah.
I have a solution to Section 21.
Oh, so you're rushing me so you can speak more?
Yes.
All right. You fill your boots, mate. Crack on. I like this.
You have your 3 hours a day.
That's a fair point, Michael. Carry on.
Section 21. If the landlord wants to sell the property for under a tenant, the local authority gets the opportunity to buy it at, say, 90% of its value. That way, council housing stock goes up, council gets an income, tenant gets security.
Tenant stays put. Ideally, although there'd be some wrinkles there. So I like something revolutionary, or radical's a good word, not revolutionary. Something a bit radical, because the slow embedding of landlord privilege is, the longer this conversation has gone on and the more we've brought in parallels with Lloyd's names and slave owners and banks, the more you realise that the entire system is built to favour those who have already got the most. And this is one of the most obvious examples of times when ordinary people have their faces rubbed in it, but it's so normalised that you don't sometimes even notice. Rick's in Tiverton. Rick, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. First-time caller. I'm not going to say I'm nervous, though.
Good.
Long-time listener. So I'm sort of similar to the previous caller, as I'm worried about being kicked out of our property.
Yeah.
But our situation is a bit different because we're renting from family.
Oh.
And as I was saying to, I think your producer on the phone, that I worry about our landlord getting bored and just booting us out because they seem like they're really not interested in having this house anymore.
But I mean, you'd think if a family member hasn't recognised the tension between asset and humanity, then what hope is there for everybody else?
Yeah, you'd think, because also his granddaughter's renting the property, but his great-grandkids are in the house as well.
Crikey.
But the reason why I know he's losing interest in the house is because he wanted to sell it to my partner's brother before her brother said, why don't you rent it to my partner?
Oh, yeah.
And the house needs a lot of work doing to it, a lot of repairs. Whenever we bring it up with him, he will find an excuse not to do it, or he'll ignore us. Or when he does come round to look at it, he'll moan about how much it will cost and everything. Like, we've got mould in the house, double glazing that's not fitted properly, and things like that.
So you think he's running it down until he sells it almost as a fixer-upper?
Pretty much,
because that's the second call. That's two calls on the trot, isn't it, that have been describing a similar situation caused by. And I listen. I'm not completely naive. I understand the mentality of being a landlord and seeing the home. What to you is a home, to him it might as well be an investment in gilts or shares or gold bullion or something like that.
I get that as well. I mean, I'm not wanting to stop anyone making money.
But you can have a balance. There can be some protections in place.
There is a balance. It's like the most petty one for me was I'm disabled. I suffer from seizures and fibromyalgia. Sorry, it's not your fault.
No, I know, but I'm still sorry.
It's all right. Well, I can say it's James's fault next time I have one. So I fell down the stairs. After a seizure, but I took the banister out of the wall with me.
Right.
So my partner rang up the landlord, said, "Can you come fix the banister? Rick's fallen down the stairs."
Yeah.
He comes 7 o'clock at night when the kids are in bed, and we tell him he can't drill in the walls because it'll wake the kids up. Yeah. So he huffs and puffs. Oh. Comes back the next day as I'm going to pick the kids up from school. And then proceeds to tell me how he fell down the stairs the other day and it was worse than what I did, and he didn't manage to pull the banister out of the wall. And he then was saying that I'm getting bored of it. I might as well just sell up and things like that.
And that's what Mick was telling us. Really, that sense you now have, that fear that if you actually demand the basic provisions from the landlord that you should have the right to expect, then you move up the list, or the likelihood of him getting out of the game altogether actually increases, which I suppose brings us back to Mick's point, where he would then be required to offer first dibs, if you like, to the local authority. So that line, the more this conversation has continued, the more you realise, and you almost have to give him credit for not realising what a beautiful distillation of the problem that it was. But this Tory MP, absolutely apoplectic at the idea of, and I quote, the state turning around and saying to individuals what they can and cannot do with their own properties. A member of the governing party, of course, that thinks the state gets to turn around and tell you what you can and can't do by way of peaceful protest.
James O'Brien on LBC.
Is it that time of week? That time of the week already? Goodness me. Hallelujah. Let joy be unconfined. If you don't know what this is, I don't think I need to explain it anymore. It's been running for so long now that it's become something of an institution, and also quite self-explanatory. I'll tell you two things that you need to know. Number one, it's the only hour of radio every week that comes with a prize. There is a good prize to be won for my favourite contribution of the week. And that prize is a brand new Mystery Hour board game, which is... So people keep telling me about new ways in which they have managed to enjoy it. So I got an old friend from school who came to one of my book gigs telling me they just sit with the cards at the dinner. If they're going out for dinner, instead of taking a pack of playing cards, they take a pack of question cards and play the game without the board. Just keep the card if you win a point. Anyway, I digress. Somehow, the people at Big Sky Games managed to turn it into a brilliant board game. And you can win one if you make my favourite contribution of the day. Find out more about the game at mysteryhour.co.uk, where you can in fact buy it. And the full terms and conditions for that competition, because it abides by all the rules of adulthood and radio regulations, can be found at lbc.co.uk. I think that's what we'll do. That's it. We'll just crack on, and you can work out how it works if you haven't listened to it before by listening to it now. 5 minutes after 12 is the time. Let's start in Felixstowe. Abby is there. Abby, question or answer?
Question, please.
Carry on.
Thank you. Can I say I'm a big fan, and I'm very nervous because it's my first time calling in.
You can say both of those things, and I can say to the first, thank you, how kind, and to the second, don't worry, it's only me.
Thank you. Okay, so my question is, a few weeks ago, I listen to your show every week, and a few weeks ago, somebody asked a question about gladiators and about their stage names. My question and my thought process from that was, I wondered if anybody ever asked for their autographs. And then I thought, I wonder how long we've been asking for autographs for. How long has that tradition been going on? Why did it start, and who started it?
It's a really funny one, isn't it? Because it doesn't. I mean, I suppose you're just. It's a memento of meeting somebody, isn't it?
At what point did somebody become so? Who would have been first asked for also
the origins? Yeah. Well, we need to distill it down to a single question, Abby. So,
okay,
what is it? The first recorded autograph?
The first recorded autograph.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's the first? The first known case of someone asking for an autograph or getting an autograph or signing an autograph.
Yeah. Yeah, and hopefully whoever rings in might be able to give us a bit more background on where the autograph came from.
Did you know? I like that question a lot. I'm doing Greek at the moment on Duolingo. I'm trying to improve my Greek, and because it involves me seeing written Greek, as I've managed to speak a bit over the years. I'm realising things that I hadn't realised before, and I can see, with the word autograph written down in front of me, I can see where it comes from in the Greek.
Oh, go on then.
It means written by yourself, aphthograph. So graph, as you'd expect, is writing, and then aphtho is he or self or this or they. It's like a definite article, so it means that you wrote it yourself. Self-written.
Wow.
Written. You don't sound that impressed.
No, I am.
No, you're
I'm
not.
Interested. I'm impressed. I'm interested in the origin of the word.
There it is.
By your understanding
There
of
it is.
Greek
It's Greek, and I'm on a 5-day streak and counting. Thank you, Abby. After I probably got that slightly wrong, but I wouldn't have seen that before because I haven't been trying to see the written Greek in front of me rather than just the learned words. Mike is in Taunton. Mike, question or answer?
Hello, James. I have a question. So I'm sat in my dining room looking at the fish tank, and there's about 10 different types of fish in the tank.
It's a big tank.
And there's some guppies. Yeah, he's quite big. There's about 100 fish in total.
Okay.
But there are guppies, there are gouramis. What I want to
Cold
know
water
is
then, not tropical.
No, it's tropical.
Is it?
It's 25 degrees.
Okay,
like that.
I thought guppies were cold water fish.
I'll try it and let you know if they're still alive in the morning.
Go on.
So they all hang around in species groups. So the gouramis hang around together, the guppies hang around together, the neon tetras hang around together. What I want to know is, how do they know what they look like in order to do that?
Self-recognition, when you can't see yourself. Do they not have a quick check in the aquarium glass and then go swimming off in the right direction to the other? No.
We should have put a mirror in there for them.
So how do they know what species they are? Is the question in a way.
Yeah, how do they know what they are in order to hang around with other things that look the same? I then started thinking about maybe that applies to other animals. So we've got wild deer and ponies on the hills here in Somerset. And why don't the deer hang around with the ponies? But maybe they smell different. And then I thought fish
would be different. Fish don't really have a smell. I like that. You're on. I like that a lot. Thank you, Mike. How do fish know what fish they are in order to congregate with other fish of the same genus? Would that be the right word? Species? I don't know. Fishiness. Similar fish. Sarah, is chaos? Really? Is that a place?
Chaos. It's actually pronounced Schaus.
Well, it's not anymore. It's pronounced chaos as far as I'm concerned, but it's spelled chaos. It is literally spelled chaos. There's chaos in Portugal. Schaus. It's pronounced Schaus, like mouse.
It simply means earth or ground. It's not very chaotic.
Oh, how interesting. Question or answer?
It's a question, please, James. Has anybody actually ever died in the House of Commons or the House of Lords?
Well, Oliver Dowden came pretty close yesterday. Or do you mean literally?
I mean literally.
I see.
Especially in the House of Lords, all the people are quite old.
I mean, part of me thinks
anybody just quietly passed away.
Part of me thinks that if it had happened, I'd remember it. Do you know what I mean? It would have come up as a. But I can't off the top of my head think of any examples of it. But you mean dying in the chamber?
In the chamber.
Not even in their office afterwards or on the lavatory, but actually in the chamber.
Actually, I suppose the office or
no. It's got to be in the chamber.
In the chamber.
I love that. Yes. Well, I don't love it because obviously it'd be very sad for some people involved. But it's what made you think about that? For goodness' sake.
Well, I was listening to the radio earlier, and somebody said breaking news, and I just heard the word collapse. I thought, somebody's collapsed in the Scottish Parliament, and then I was out poo picking and thinking, and my mind got on to. Had anybody actually ever died?
Has anyone ever died in the chamber, on the benches? I shall find out for you. Thank you for that, Sarah. No, and also for introducing me to Chaos, a town called Chaos. Sounds like a Netflix series. Adam's in Cambridge. Adam, question or answer?
Question.
Carry on.
It's about beer production. I run a pub, and I've noticed in the last few years the number of hazy beers are getting more common, and that's because a lot of brewers aren't using finings in their beer anymore. And so I've gone off the point a bit. Do you
know what? I'm absolutely riveted. I love beer talk. You carry on. Fill your boots. No, you go on.
Finings traditionally were made from a product called isinglass, which is derived from the swim bladders of fish. And what I want to know is, where did that idea come from that essentially fish guts could play a process in beer production? It just baffles me that anyone ever had that thought, let alone was able to put it into practice. Yeah.
I mean, that's true of a lot of things, isn't it, in a way? I mean, the discovery of even certain combinations, or somebody at some point in the distant past looked at looked at a calf suckling and thought, well, I'll have a bit of that milk. And then you've got the things that are poisonous and how we worked out that some mushrooms are not, and all of it. But this is different. This is production. And then the idea that you've taken something out of a fish and thought, I wonder if that will make my beer less cloudy.
Yeah, precisely. It's
well, wouldn't it have happened? The reason why I don't think you'll get an answer is I suspect it might have happened by accident.
I suppose that's entirely possible. I'd be open to the answer being absolutely anything, so baffled by it I am.
So, but it would be impossible to know when it happened because someone accidentally left some fish guts in their beer and noticed it went clear, and then made some more beer and it went cloudy. Or the other way. Well, I'll put it on the list.
I hope someone out there knows. Because
what's it called again? Isinglass.
Isinglass. Yeah, Isinglass. It's spelled Isinglass.
Well, it would be, wouldn't it?
It would.
Not like Shouse. You're on. I'll try and find out. Thank you for that. I like that, and I like beer. Jack's in Wakefield. Jack, question or answer?
Hi, James. It's a question.
Carry on, Jack.
Another first-time caller, so good to speak to you.
Likewise, mate. Thanks for getting in touch.
My question is there a scientific reason, or what is the scientific reason, that petrol smells so good to many of us, myself included?
You really like the smell of petrol? It's not good for you. I'm the same. When we used to keep like that bitumen smell as well. Do you know what I mean? Like fences, fresh fences.
Yeah, well, whenever I'm filling up my car, I just get a whiff of the stuff and I want to guzzle it. I know I shouldn't, but... I don't like it that much. I've never wanted to taste it. I like the smell. No, it's like... I mean, it is just a really good smell, and I know I'm not alone in that. So
but why wouldn't it be? There's lots of things. Lots of things smell nice. Why is petrol any different? There's
most things that smell nice you can eat, or there's a reason that they smell nice, right? Petrol is obviously like toxic, so why does that smell so good to us? I also wonder if it's a diesel. I don't know about that, but that's obviously not my primary question.
No, why does petrol have an attractive smell when it is so toxic for us? Because I was thinking of Lush. You know Lush, the shop Lush.
Yep.
Because that smells amazing, right? But you wouldn't want to eat anything in there. But that's been deliberately engineered to smell delicious. It's supposed to smell fruity and delicious to tempt you to buy their soaps. But it's not the same at all as petrol.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Well, it's not really. But thank you, Jack. Good question. I used to love the smell of the garage when I was growing up. And it was because Dad kept the petrol mower in there, so there was that faint hum of petrol in the. I do know what you mean, although I've never been tempted to drink it. It's 12:15.
James O'Brien on LBC.
12:17 is the time. An interesting mix of questions this week. What was the first autograph? Who discovered that isinglass, which is a fish-derived product, would have a clarifying effect on beer? You can see why he's fascinated by that question, can't you? Has anybody ever died on the benches in the House of Commons? How do fish know what fish they are in order to make sure they hang out with other fish? My suggestion that fish don't smell has come in for quite a lot of criticism. And I can see why, given that fish really, really smell. But that's after they've come out of the water and been prepared for... I don't know that fish in the water can... Of course they can smell things. Sharks can smell blood. I think that question might not be as good as I originally thought it was, Mike, actually. But we shall see. And why do some people really like the smell of petrol when it's really, really bad for you? It's not an evolutionary glitch, is it? Because petrol would only have been refined relatively recently, and it may well be, if enough people were drinking petrol to actually have an effect upon reproduction, then people who like the smell of petrol would actually be removed from the gene pool. It would self-edit. That's how the survival of the fittest. And having a proclivity to drink petrol would put you very near the bottom of the gene pool. But of course, that's not going to be the answer. But nice smells. And I think, I could be wrong, because I've only got one word I use when I'm talking about wine. I get teased about it quite a lot. But I heard someone do it years ago when I was intimidated by wine lists. And I've done it ever since. I said, what would you like to do? I said, do you know what word it is? Can you guess what word I use? If the sommelier, if I'm somewhere posh, or the waiter. No, it's not extraordinary, Keith. It's specific to, I can't say bring me an extraordinary wine. Bring us your finest wines. So I said, well, I'd like something. If I'm ordering white wine, I say, I'd like something. And I've got a word I use that I used to think made me sound very sophisticated, but now I think it just makes me sound a bit daft. But old habits die hard, don't they? Petrol, I'm pretty sure I've heard people talk about petrol-y top notes on wines, which kind of speaks to the idea that the smell for many of us can be quite attractive, when by most laws it really shouldn't be. 12:19 is the time. Eamon is in Ross-on-Sea in Wales. Ross-on-Sea. Question or answer?
Hi, James.
Hello.
Hi, James. You'll know more about this than most of us, I am sure.
Unlikely.
It's the nature of exact time. Do you remember in the old days when the analogue signal used to give us the pips on Radio 4 at 6 o'clock, and the last long bleep would be timed to exact time?
Yeah.
Well, in the digital age, that isn't the case anymore.
Well, you've already disproved your first point, which is that I would know more about this than you. Sorry.
Now, like I consistently watch football matches on TV.
Yeah.
Coming through via the internet. My son lives in New York, and he is consistently ahead of me. So we also follow the game on Twitter, both of us on different Twitters. His Twitter is consistently ahead of my Twitter. So he'll tell me that my team or our team has scored 30 seconds before I see it happening on the consistently.
Okay.
And so much so that my wife sort of like hates me sitting there watching it with her, because she Diane doesn't like me
spoiler alert
telling her what spoiler alert.
Yeah.
But it consistently happens. Now, the football that we're watching is 40 miles away as the crow flies.
And yet he's getting the information quicker than you.
And he gets the information quicker than I do. Now, when all analog signals are turned off and we only have digital, what will be the nature of real exact time?
In broadcasts?
Well, yeah. Do we know when we're listening to something on the radio or watching it on TV? Do we know that it's exactly happening? I know we're only dabbling with 30 seconds or 10 seconds or 2 seconds.
No, but still, you mean as it can't be completely live, because even if it's a nanosecond that it takes to travel from the place where it's happening to the place where you're watching it.
Yeah, but the analog signal on Radio 4, analog signal, was always deemed to be
as close as damn it to live
without bothering. Yeah.
I understand almost everything you've said. Go on.
people listening to me on the radio now, of which there'll be about, 12 people listening to me on the radio, are they're not hearing me as I'm sitting, because I'm assuming you've got a 10-second or a 5-second.
Well, if you turned your radio on now, you'd hear a 10-second echo.
Right. Yeah. But
if you turned your radio on now, you'd hear a 10-second echo.
Yeah.
I'm here all week.
Very good.
You actually would. I phoned up Gordon Astley on Beacon Radio many, many, many moons ago. I know that Gordon's often listening, in which case, I hope you're well, mate. And they told me to turn my radio off, and I didn't. And so I'm telling a joke or whatever I was doing on his show. And then I hear the radio in the background. I answer his original question again. So I've got the tape somewhere. It's my radio debut. It might be of historical interest one day to the 12 people that you've just referenced. And so I go, "Hi, it's James from Kidderminster." And then a bit of banter, and I say, and I'd start telling a joke. And then I hear the radio in the background 10 seconds. I go, "Hi, it's James from Kidderminster." I do it again, and they obviously know exactly what's going on. But because I was only 9, they're a lot more patient with me than I am with people who ring this programme and forget to turn their radio off in the background because of the echo it creates. So when we turn off all the analogue signals, how live will it be?
How live will things be?
It's a lovely question, that, Eamon. Who do you follow?
Well,
Wrexham.
Liverpool.
Liverpool.
My pains.
Yeah, so you've had a tough few weeks, haven't you, eh? What's happened there?
Well, I think it's exhaustion, isn't it?
I think it's psychological. Since he announced he was going, I think something shifts inside.
Yeah.
I really do. I don't know whether there's any basis for that, but the opposite, of course, happening at Kidderminster now that Phil Brown has committed for another 2 years. A slightly bigger story, of course, than Jurgen Klopp deciding to take some time off from football management. Phil Brown's Red Army, albeit that we're getting relegated, the fact that he's signed up for another 2 years has been greeted with enormous joy back in the Shire. Thank you, Eamon. Hully is in Derby. You've been on already this week.
Yes, I have.
How did that happen? We don't allow this.
Because I guess I'm a favourite.
I'm going to just have a quick word with the producer, all right? Don't. No, I am. You're all right. It's not your fault. Hully was on already this week. What do you think this is? The breakfast show? What? Yes. We like. Is it? Do we have different rules for Mystery Hour? All right. Apparently, you're the beneficiary of a rule that has just been invented, Hully. As Mystery Hour is exempt from the be very, very careful of putting the same people on too often kind of thing. Question or answer, Hully?
Answer.
Oh, well, that explains it. You've obviously come up with something that we felt very few people would be able to come up with. Carry on.
The Parliament one, the House of Commons, should I say?
Yes.
So it wasn't. They've not. So this person wasn't he didn't die on the thing, because I don't think anyone has.
Right.
But there was a guy that was our Prime Minister called Samuel Percival, I think.
Spencer.
That's it.
Yeah.
And he was shot.
He was shot
by someone.
What was the name of the assassin?
John Billingham from Liverpool.
No
he didn't like the government. He hated the government.
And he was shot dead? Was he in the chamber at the time?
He was in the lobby of the House of Commons. This was before, obviously, it was guarded and things. I think the reason why it's guarded now is because he was shot. He was assassinated.
Qualifications? Qualifications? How do you know this?
I read a lot. I research a lot of things that I'm not 100% on. I like to be 100% on things before I give my opinion to things. So I do research a lot. I read a lot.
You couldn't do this job.
Why? I think I'd be great at that.
Of course you would. I was joking. I
think I'd be amazing. I feel like if you had me on the radio for one day, I think that'd be great.
You never know your luck. From Little Acorns, to start with a round of applause on Mystery Hour, Hully. And who knows where it may lead. Thank you for that. I mean, I'll cross that one off, but equally, you'd think someone in the House of Lords, there's always stories, isn't there, when you're growing up about an old fellow who keeps warm in the library by sitting there with a newspaper, and then the librarian comes around at the end of the day and realises that someone's passed away at some point. That could easily happen in the House of Lords, you would have thought. I'm not making light of it in any way, but I'm just saying that for that reason and that reason only, I'm not removing Sarah's question from the board, although Hully's answer was both definitive and applause-worthy. Carl's in Exeter. Carl, question or answer?
It's an answer to the same question.
Oh, go on.
Yeah, so Michael Roberts died at the Dispatch Box in 1983.
Oh, Lord, really?
Yeah, he was an Undersecretary for Wales, and he stood up answering questions in the evening, and he had a massive heart attack. And he actually died at the Dispatch Box.
Albeit that they would have tried to do CPR and taken him away.
They would have tried to do CPR. I mean, the Commons was suspended. They tried to do everything, and he was pronounced dead when he got to the hospital.
Yes.
But you can't pronounce somebody dead at the location anyway. So
can you not?
And no. Well, you wouldn't normally.
No.
You would normally try and get them to hospital whilst reviving them, but he was already dead by the time he got there. It was a massive heart attack.
Oh, dear.
So that was 1983.
You just needed one to answer the question. It was a yes or no question. How do you know that? I mean, qualifications,
I was a junior civil servant in the Welsh office at the time.
Oh, okay.
So he was one of my junior ministers.
Oh,
and I was very, very junior.
Yeah, of course, but you would remember, wouldn't you?
Oh, yeah, you absolutely remember. And there was a conversation that happened at the time about whether you were allowed to die in the House of Commons or not.
Ah, yes.
And it's a myth that you're not.
I think Disneyland. You're not allowed to die at Disneyland.
Again, it's a myth. I mean,
are you sure?
Absolutely, it's a myth.
Disneyland is a myth.
No, I don't know about Disneyland, but I know in the Commons that. And certainly in parts of Westminster, there's no such rule.
No, I like that. Do you think would a round of applause be inappropriate at this point, given that this is quite morbid?
I think a round of applause would be inappropriate, given that I knew the guy. And
I do too. I'm glad I asked.
Although a mystery hour game would be quite fun.
Well, well, you're in the mix for that. But I think we'll both agree that it would feel a little odd for the round of applause to be issued at this point. But thank you for answering the question in such a definitive fashion. It is coming up to 12:30. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we want to know who discovered that putting some fishy product into beer would make it less cloudy. The fishy product being known as isinglass. Why does petrol smell so nice when you really don't want to be drinking it? How live will broadcasts be when everything is digital? How do fish know that they are a certain species of fish in order to therefore congregate in a fish tank or in a body of water with other fish of the same fish-based specifications? And who signed the first autograph, or indeed who asked for the first autograph? Or I suppose to combine the two questions, what was the first autograph? It's coming up to 12:30. Tim Humphrey is here with your headline.
James O'Brien on LBC.
31 minutes after 12 is the time. Joe's in Ferrybridge. Joe, question or answer?
It's a question, please.
Carry on, Joe.
What makes stuff sticky? Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, because because different liquids, right?
Yeah.
I've been thinking about the stuff that I spill down myself.
Right. It's a family show, Joe. I mean? Steady on.
Food and drink.
Okay.
Nothing like that.
Right.
Food and drink, right?
Yeah.
And there's certain stuff, that is all right to clean up. Do you know what I mean? It just disappears, James. I don't even need to do much.
I know. I'm a big spiller as well. Yeah. Actually, it's not good. I should have grown out of it by now. I've got a nice new yellow jumper, Joe. I got it from Marks and Spencer's, and I was cooking puttanesca sauce last night. And I said to Mrs. O'Brien, do you know what? I'm 52 years old. I think I've finally reached the point where I know that I'm not going to successfully cook a tomato-based sauce without getting some splashes on my brand new yellow jumper from Marks and Spencer. So I took it off. I had a T-shirt on underneath. I wasn't like Nick Cayman in a Levi's advert. No, oh goodness me, I can't cook like that unless I'm barbecuing.
A dinner time that would be, eh?
Hey, you're not wrong. What's for pudding? Anyway, go on. So
I'm just intrigued about, because obviously you've got the sort of lower end stuff like water, and sometimes when I have beans on toast, that's not too sticky, but then it starts to get a little bit more
crusty,
active as you go up.
Yeah. What's the stickiest then?
Have you spilt Ribena down yourself ever?
What? Undiluted?
The proper hardcore stuff.
You can't be messing with that, mate. Seriously.
None of that. But then, your more soury drinks, your more not too much fizzy sometimes is all right.
Sugar.
That thick stuff.
It's sugar, isn't it? Sugar is sticky.
Yeah. Is that what they put in super glue?
That's a very good point. That is definitely not what they
go towards super glue.
That's not sugar. That's not your sugar-based stickiness. Don't
put that on your porridge.
You wouldn't be wanting to have that. No. So it's going to be something. I'll tell you what, Joe. It's going to be something to do with molecules, isn't it?
Yeah, I love that word.
It is molecules. Somewhere it's molecules, and
sugar does play a part, surely,
in some stickiness. But as you quite rightly remind us, it's got very little to do with superglue.
Yeah,
as far as we're aware. So, what makes something sticky?
Yeah, lovely. And then I can avoid it. Do you know what I mean? When I'm trying to, eat well.
You might not be able to. You might not be able to. It might contain all your favourite things.
Oh, you're lying.
I know, it might do.
Don't ruin me. I
mean, there's a reason why. You like thinking about Ribena and sticky stuff and nice...
Yeah, well, I was just sort of looking
at
the
Haribo, sweets, melted sweets, mate. Melted sweets, what are they like?
Exactly. I need to change my ways, really, but hopefully I can learn from you today.
Well, bitumen, tar, all of those things. Right, you're on.
Yeah.
What makes something... What makes something sticky? That's a great question. Thank you, Joe. 12:34 is the time. And Lee's in Belfast. Lee, question or answer?
Answer.
Carry on.
So it's about petrol. So petrol has hydrocarbons in it, which is what we burn off in order to produce the energy. And some of these hydrocarbons, like benzene and toluene, you may find in there, are what we call aromatic compounds.
Is that right?
Yes.
Wow.
Yep. So they're structured a bit differently compared to other ones where they're sort of more complex. But these aromatic compounds are also commonly used in stuff like fragrances or deodorants. So the same chemicals that you might find in your petrol, often you might find in your expensive aftershaves or your deodorants.
What a fantastic answer.
Mm-hmm.
That's incredible. Name some other, what they're called, aromatic compounds. Can you name some others? What did you say, benzene?
I've just been looking at my deodorants, actually, funny enough, before you said that. All mine contain one called limonene, which is a chemical that's found often in citrus peels and will give a fragrance a citrusy or fruity scent.
Nice. You're wearing the links, are you?
No, actually, it's, am I allowed to say brand names here?
Yeah, go on, of course you are.
Old Spice.
Oh, blimey, Dad, crikey, you got it, I like it. One of the classics. So it did literally, petrol will contain some aromatic compounds, which we would be unsurprised to find in things that we expect to smell delicious, but it's the same chemical occurrence. Qualifications?
Yeah. I am a master's student in chemical engineering. Actually, I have one more thing. It's not a question, but it's something you mentioned in another answer question I think might be interesting.
You're not really allowed to do that, unfortunately.
It's not. It's not an answer to a question.
Oh,
it's something you mentioned.
Go on.
There are places that have made it illegal to die there because they don't want people taking up spaces in the cemeteries.
How does that work?
Essentially, if you come there and you die, they will fine your family or possible imprisonment if you die there. I know it's not related, but I just thought
what sort of places are we talking? I'm all confused now.
There have been like towns, I think, in places like the US and Brazil.
Oh, just to save public money.
Essentially, but the local cemetery is becoming too full.
Yeah,
we just can't have
any
more
people. So you can't register the
here.
death there. So the death has to be registered somewhere else, so that the bureaucracy and the logistics go somewhere else. Pear drops, Lee.
Yeah, pear drops as well. Yes, they will also have. I don't know which specific chemical.
But you get a whiff with a pear drop of solvent almost, don't you? Sometimes.
Yes, indeed.
Some sort of solvent. Mark's just sent me the words pear drops, and for a moment I thought that he'd bum-dialed me or something, but that is obviously a contribution to the first part of our conversation before it all went a bit morbid.
Yes, sorry. I just thought I'd
I like it. I like come one, come all. And you get a round of applause, don't you?
Thank you very much.
Well played. Putting your chemical engineering masters to extremely good use. Charles is in Bagshot in Surrey. Charles, question or answer?
It's a very exciting accounting question.
Hooray! Hooray! Go on, what is it?
I've always been confused. You know when a company's books are in dire straits and they're about to go bankrupt, they say the company's in the red?
Yes.
Which makes sense because red is the colour of danger.
Yes.
Yet when they're in a good state, they say they're in the black.
Yeah.
Why not in the green?
Well,
so I've never understood why.
Hang on, what's the question? What is the question?
So why do they say a company's
in the black?
Yeah.
In the black. Well, because they would have written it down in black, wouldn't they? Ink is black. And they'd only have two colours of ink, and you'd use the black ink all the time for your accounts, and then you'd use the red. So, wouldn't it be that?
I've just thought of that. That might be.
No, you haven't. I just said it.
No, I thought I had a brilliant question here. No, but I've always.
You wouldn't have had much ink, would you? It's not like now when you've got all these different colours in your printer. You'd have black and maybe some red. You're using a quill. Bob Cratchit. Yeah. Do you think he had green ink or black ink? But he was literally a clerk. He was doing Ebenezer Scrooge's accounts.
Yeah, okay.
Well, I don't know, Charles. I don't want to shoot your fox.
Can we get a qualified professional to answer?
What are you suggesting? I'll put it on the board. I like it, but I'd be surprised if it didn't have something to do with printing. Don't you think?
Possibly.
It's there. Thank you, Charles. Good work. 12:39 is the time. There was something I nearly did in the course of the last 10 minutes that I am very, very glad I didn't. And I wonder whether you would like to use WhatsApp to tell me whether or not you noticed. All right, so 0345 6060 973. It's something I could have just about styled it out, but it would have been quite crass, but also possibly quite funny, but offensive at the same time. I'm very glad I didn't do it. But just out for my own interest, because I'm not going to read it out, just WhatsApp me if you noticed. It wasn't with Charles, I should stress. Jeremy is in Bury St Edmunds. Jeremy, question or answer?
Hello. Well, it's a question, James.
This is are you on the system as Jeremy in Bury St Edmunds now?
Well, I've just shifted my location to Bury St Edmunds because I'm moving there in a month.
I know, but is this your first call from there?
Well, no.
So you're already in the system.
12 miles away.
Because people will be confused. Tell people who you used to be. You used to be Jeremy from
Belsize Park.
Belsize Park. LBC legend. Yeah. How are you getting on? How's things?
Well, that's kind of you. I am very much looking forward to failing to become an independent MP. And in the meantime, I've got too much time on my hands.
I told you when you retired that you'd get bored. Didn't I say? You'll get bored. I said.
Let me tell you, I'm trying to address my various problems, okay?
Aren't we all, Jeremy? Aren't we all?
One of them, I have a drink problem, James, which is that many years ago I lost all appetite for drink.
Gosh,
okay?
That is a problem.
And it really is. And so I've been trying to tell myself to get interested in wine. So I've been buying it.
Oh, yes.
Okay?
Yes.
I should say that this question is not something I'm likely to encounter, okay? But I've been buying posh wine.
Oh, okay.
And so I've been reading about it, yeah? This is all in the hope that it will make me want to drink it.
I like it. I like your thinking.
It's a bit silly, but I'm buying a house with a lot of underground space.
A lot of cellarage, I believe, is the technical term. So, why wouldn't you? Absolutely.
Yeah. And so, look, I've been reading about wine, and they keep saying, decant 2 days before.
Oh gosh, that posh.
Or 2 hours before. No, that posh.
Wow.
We're talking
okay.
Posh. Okay?
Yeah.
We're talking the sort of wine I wouldn't order in a restaurant, but some people must do.
Yes, they must.
So the question for sommeliers or billionaires is, if you go into a posh restaurant and order a bottle of wine for several £100s, then it'll need decanting, but you've only just gone in and ordered it.
What an excellent question, old boy.
Do they ignore the decanting and send you a bottle of wine which will actually be second rate because it hasn't been prepared properly? Or
they serve it in suboptimal condition in a way.
Yeah. Or do they keep you waiting for 2 hours while you're gasping for a drink because it's not ready? I mean, this is it's not a problem that I will face in the immediate future, but you might. So I thought it would help if the nation were to address it.
This is a matter of great urgency. So it's a very good point. So you go for an absolute top of the range wine, and you will be advised to decant it hours, even days previously to drinking. Indeed. So what happens if you order it in a very posh restaurant?
So
Lovely.
What do you do? I don't want to be caught in one of those socially awkward situations.
Could you imagine?
With a very rich person ordering a bottle of wine and saying, should you?
And I mean, crucially, is it working? Are you in any way rediscovering your palate?
I'm far too scared to open any of these cases of
because
wine
they're so expensive.
Yeah.
So what are you going to do with them?
Oh, James, we haven't got time for therapy now, but maybe one day.
No, you're probably right. There it is. Jeremy, thank you. It's lovely to hear your voice. I hope our paths cross again soon. Jeremy was, before he retired, one of the, if not the leading speakers agent. He also looked after performers of various and writers of various descriptions. But if you needed someone to speak at your event, he was your man. His company, of course, still running, but he's too busy looking sort of plaintively at big, incredibly expensive cases of wine in his cellar. Coming up to 1:45, you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. That's quite a good question. I've got Angela Hartnett on Full Disclosure. I could have asked her, couldn't I? If that had come up, because I know she listens a lot to the programme. In fact, she's probably listening now. So I wonder, but you wouldn't want, if you were running a restaurant, you wouldn't want to say, well, we serve it in sub. So what do you do? If you've got a bottle of wine that's supposed to be decanted, do you phone up in advance? Or do you serve it in slightly suboptimal? It might be a difference. It might be 100% wine if you decant it 12 hours previously, and it's still a 98% wine if you do. So it could be small margins, perhaps. I don't know. But I do know it's 12:45.
James O'Brien on LBC.
Questions that need answers. The first autograph. How do fish recognise each other, or indeed themselves? It's quite a fish theme, isn't it? Who put fish stuff in beer and discovered that it clarifies the beer? Done the petrol question. I like that. That was my brilliant answer. How live is live broadcast, especially when we turn off all the analogue signals? What makes something sticky? Why do we say in the black for when you're in profit or not in debt? And if a wine needs to be decanted hours previous to serving to be at its best, what on earth do they do when you order such a wine in a restaurant? Kerry's in the Shetland Islands. Kerry, question or answer?
It's an answer.
Carry on.
Right, taking the speed of light at 186,000 miles per second, or 300,000 kilometres per second.
Yes.
Taking that unimpeded light from a radio station, or not light from a radio station,
Sound.
but radio waves which travel at the same speed of light.
Yes.
Will reach you just almost. You wouldn't know the difference. Instantaneous. Mind you, if you were on Pluto listening to LBC, it would take 4 hours to get there.
Big shout to anyone on Pluto who is currently listening on LBC. Don't forget to like and subscribe. What? But what? And is digital sound waves as well?
No, we're talking analog wave. We're talking analog.
No, we're not. We're talking digital. We're saying what happens when you turn off all the analog.
Oh, well, when you turn off all the analog, the digital signals are coming routed through cabling, fibre optics, satellite, many other
Take a bit longer.
servers. Yeah, it takes longer, different servers. So you could be watching a station on, say, Sky, or listening to the radio station on your mobile phone, and it's taking a few seconds, not a few milliseconds, to get to you, because it's going through various piping, such as
So I think that answers Eamon's question. We don't know why. Do we know why his son watching a Liverpool game in New York gets it quicker than he gets it watching it online in Wales?
Very likely because it's coming via satellite
to New York.
To New York, say, for instance, or it could be undersea cabling, which may be just as fast. It could be that the other way it's being routed through Australia, which is going to take a lot longer.
Oh, you live and
light
learn.
From the sun takes 8.5 minutes to get here. That gives you an idea. But light and radio waves travel at the same speed.
I think you've answered it in there. Qualifications?
Amateur radio enthusiast and amateur astronomer.
Oh, look at that. Fantastic. Thank you, Kerry. Have a round of applause on me.
Thank you.
Thank you. Jono's in Wareham. Jono, question or answer?
Sure. It's an answer, please, mate.
Take your time.
It's on the beer.
Are you?
No, I'm not on the beer.
Oh.
It's for the beer question.
Oh, carry on.
It's a bit early for that, but yeah, maybe not early. Yeah.
Get on with it. I've got loads to get through.
All right, okay. So basically, it goes back to like villages when they would go out hunting and things.
Yeah.
And so they would have, their gourds.
Yeah.
Like
I had a gourd once.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, from Mallorca. Do you remember you could buy when you come back from Mallorca with a gourd for your dad and a donkey for your mum?
That's the one.
So a leather gourd, and you'd put wine in it and pour it like a Roman into it. Anyway, carry on. Sorry.
That's it. Yeah. So they were originally made out of fish guts and fish bladders. And they realised that the wine they were drinking from their gourd when they were out hunting and travelling...
The gourds were made out of fish bladders? They were not?
Yeah.
Were they? What?
Yeah.
They'd be big old fish.
Yeah. So they were the wine that they were drinking away from the village, from their gourd, was clearer
than the stuff coming out of the barrel.
Stuff coming out of the barrel, yeah. And then so obviously they use fish guts for clarifying wine, and so they use that in the beer.
There might be a bit of wriggle room here. It may be that. But the gourds came from other creatures, but they realised
the stuff that there was made
was the gut-based stuff was doing the business, so they experimented because it'd be easier to get hold of fish guts than it would be to get hold of cow guts.
That's it.
Albeit because the gourd... Wow, qualifications. I like this answer.
Yeah. So I ran pubs and I won a few beer awards, actually. The youngest East Dorset Camera Pub of the Year winner.
Youngest East Dorset Camera Pub of the Year winner. Well, hang on. So you were Pub of the Year winner first, and then they realised you were the youngest.
Yeah. But I was there. So yeah.
So is that one award or two awards?
It's one award. Well, actually, that year I won the Rural Pub of the Year and the Overall Pub of the Year. What's the pub called? The pub's called the King's Arms in Wareham.
Well,
it's kind of bittersweet, actually, because it closed in September. I had to leave.
Oh, no.
Gutting. Just, they're all... Well, we had Banks's Amber in there all the time, and I really wanted to invite you down.
Oh, I like it at Banks's. You have to travel quite far. So what was it? Just the couldn't get back on your feet after the COVID, or...?
Well, we actually took it on just after COVID,
right.
And then we just couldn't...
Despite winning all those awards. So what are you doing now?
Yeah.
Don't mind me asking. You still got...
I'm retraining to be a health and safety officer.
Well, there you go. There's a journey.
Yeah.
A
bit different.
It is a bit different. Get a round of applause for your trouble.
Thank you very much indeed.
And my very good wishes. Thank you, Jono. 12:54. So the pub world's loss is the health and safety world's gain. Rowan's in Southend. Rowan, question or answer?
Well, according to the people that you've been having on, I might as well be listening on Pluto because of the delay.
What, really?
Yes.
Go on.
It's quite a delay. Anyway, it's an answer.
Yes.
In the black, in the red, we're going to blame the Romans on this one again.
Yes.
So it's definitely down to the colour of the ink. Vermilion, which was also used to paint the faces of the generals who were
the question's about in the black, not in the red. Why do we use in the black for people in
colour
credit?
Of the ink.
So it is the ink that they had, and then they'd use a red ink for debts and qualifications.
I had to write an essay on the history of taxation, and that included Roman taxation.
Was it a punishment for something?
No, it was 40% of my taxation course that I did as part of my PhD in accounting in
and it was in there. So really, it was Charles, I think, who asked the question, and he said he was an accountant. He should have known this. You did better in your accountancy exams than he did.
No, we will not go into how badly I did my accountancy.
Well, don't say that, because I might not be able to give you a round of applause. You might have misremembered.
No, I did. I earned that. I got an 80% on that essay.
Round of applause for Rowan.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rowan. Victoria is in Hawley. Victoria, question or answer?
It's an answer to the wine question.
Oh, splendid.
I imagine that the gentleman that you spoke to,
Jeremy,
the wine.
He's no
Jeremy,
gentleman.
I imagine that the kind of wine that he's buying is stuff, as he said, for investment.
Yeah.
That's going to be maybe slightly older, kind of first growth Bordeaux.
Yeah.
That are going to have already aged in the bottle.
Right. So it won't be on restaurant wine lists then.
It might be, but for me personally, I wouldn't be ordering it in a restaurant because of how much they'd be charging for it.
Yeah.
It doesn't need 2 to 3 days beforehand if he's opening at home to aerate it.
I don't understand what your answer is. So the advice he received from the vintner is that it does need that, and the question is, what if I ordered it in a restaurant?
In a restaurant, working in the wine trade.
Yeah.
I've never opened a bottle of wine 2 to 3 days before I required
it. Well, he hasn't imagined it, has he, Victoria? Someone's obviously told him this.
True, but obviously someone must have told him that. But
it doesn't mean it's true or necessary.
Not necessarily, no.
And also, it might be what I said. It might be that you have a tiny incremental improvement if it sits for a couple of days, oxidising.
But if you leave it too long, it will oxidise and it will go off.
Yeah, well, that's the Russian roulette that we all play when we open a 20-gram bottle of wine, isn't it? Qualifications?
I'm studying for the equivalent of a degree in study of wine.
Aren't we all? Round of applause for Victoria. The equivalent, I mean, not the actual degree. Richard's in Tunbridge Wells on a similar theme. Richard, what would you like to say?
Good afternoon.
Hello.
Victoria has stolen half of my answer, so I'll just cut to the chase.
Well, give us the other half.
She is correct. What you do in a restaurant when somebody orders a fairly posh bottle of wine is you just aerate it. If you get decanting it, you just get rid of the sediment, you pour it out very, very gently into a jug, and you get another jug, pour it backwards and forwards and backwards and forwards, which oxidizes it almost immediately. Then you put into the nice posh decanter, put it on the table.
And if you were doing it at home, you could just decant it once and leave it to sit and then pour it carefully.
You could do, but
what?
You're planning ahead 3 hours to drink your wine. Go ahead. But if you want to get some life into even a £5 supermarket bottle of wine, it will add some life to it.
Love it. Qualifications?
Was a bar manager of a one-star Michelin restaurant.
That'll do nicely. Round of applause for Richard.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'm going to squeeze. Can I squeeze in Leanne in Bexley Heath? Question or answer, Leanne?
Oh, hi, James. It's an answer.
Carry on.
It's answer to the what makes things sticky.
Molecules.
Yes, it is molecules. In the case of sugar specifically, it's sort of a phenomenon called hydrogen bonding. So basically, the molecules that make up sugar are surrounded by. They have a lot of these extensions.
Got it. No, I get it. That works. I can picture extensions.
So it can essentially form these bonds which are quite weak, but you still feel it. The hydrogen bonds between itself and say water specifically, which is why syrups are so sticky. But also it sticks to itself better, but also to things like water and skin.
Qualifications?
Long time sort of chemistry student, PhD chemistry.
Round of applause for Leanne bringing her PhD chemistry skills to the table there. And oddly, same question I think Joe gets the game this week, doesn't he? Joe gets the Mystery Hour ball game for his superb question about stickiness and his general bonhomie and cheeky chappy demeanour. Always partial to a cheeky chappy demeanour. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, the official LBC app, where you can also pause and rewind live radio. Download it now for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4. One person got the thing right that I'm very glad I didn't say. So, and I've forgotten what your name was. Sam. It was Samuel. Samuel someone got it right. Well done. Good spot. Download it now for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4 on LBC, it's Tom Swarbrick, but now it's time for Sheila Fogarty.
Thank you very much, James.
James O'Brien on LBC.